Yeah, you can see that, right?
Yes, I can see
Yeah.
that.
So I don't know what happened, but I'm not gonna worry about it.
Thanks.
Can,
Well, I'm glad it's working today. Hopefully it stays that way.
Okay.
can I
Thank you,
just say
Katie.
a little thing about the chat, actually? Um, as a please don't put any like content related to the meeting that the public should hear in the chat because that is not accessible to people later. So if you have like comments on an evaluation for SACHP or some or for a nomination, that needs to be said verbally. So just want to make sure. Using chat for clarifying or communication of like how you are accessing stuff, but actual content that the public needs to also see should not be done in the chat.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, so I use the chat for things like letting members of the public know that they're up next.
Or telling me how to pronounce somebody's name.
Yeah, or that. Okay, we are currently live streaming to YouTube. I'm going to wait to start the recording, so for the minutes, until everyone's here. Or 8:30, whichever happens first.
Like for some committee members do.
I don't believe Cassie Rippey will be joining us until like 10:30, so she won't be here for the
Okay.
morning session. All right, it is 8:30. I'm going to begin the recording.
Thank you, Katie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Friday, February 20th, 2026 meeting of the State Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. I made it on time. I'd like to again welcome everybody, but our opening statement is the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation is a 9-member committee appointed by the governor to review documentation for all state of Oregon nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. The committee meets 3 times a year to review nominations brought forward by the State Historic Preservation Office. The committee also advises the State Historic Preservation Office on matters of program, policy, and budget. This time, I'd like to do a roll call of our committee members and let yourselves introduce yourselves, and then we'll go to staff and see if we have any guests today. I can start. I'm Heidi Slaybaugh, the chair of the SACHP, not easy to say, and I live in Bend, Oregon. We can go to Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Chung from the Dalles, Oregon.
Great. Matthew.
Hi, good morning. Matt Dietrich from Eugene.
Steve.
Steve Mark from Fort Klamath.
Sarah.
Sarah Monroe from Portland.
Anne.
Good morning. My name is Ann Niblett, and I'm in Coos Bay.
Cassie is not with us yet this morning. And Greg?
Good morning. I'm Greg Shine from Portland.
Wonderful. How about Katie?
I'm Katie Ewers-Abrams. I'm the National Register Program Coordinator at SHPO and also the Board Administrator Partner for the SACHP.
Curry?
Hi, I'm Curry Gill, the Heritage Grant and Outreach Manager, and sort of filling in for Ian Johnson, the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer today.
Great. And Kim?
Morning, everyone. My name is Kim Spivey. I'm the Administrative Specialist for Oregon Heritage and SHPO, and I will be taking the minutes for this meeting.
Thanks, Kim. And I see 2 guests. Want to go ahead and introduce yourselves? We'll start with Ruth.
Good morning. My name is Ruth Sylvester, and I'm a trainer from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission.
We'll be hearing from Ruth in just a bit. And Lex.
Good morning. My name is Lex Tingy, and I'm a trainer from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission as well.
And Katie, are there any other guests online?
We do have 2 guests online, Ariel Recker and Val Ballstrom.
So at this point, I will ask you again if any of those guests have registered to provide any testimony for items that are not on the agenda.
No.
Okay. Great. Then we will move into our training by Lex and Ruth that we just heard from. So I'll let you guys, if you want to provide more introduction to yourselves and tell us all about Oregon Public Meeting Law.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my slides. All right. Everyone see that okay? Just make sure. Yes, I see some nods. Okay, cool. Well, yes, introduced ourselves, but my name is Lex. I'm from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. We'll refer to that as OGEC for short. It's a lot easier to say over and over. I also have Ruth with me here today. During the presentation, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. Ruth will be watching that. At the end of each section, we will go over those verbally as well. So we will take the time to do that. That just makes it a little bit easier so you don't forget your questions until we come to those spots. But our job as trainers is to assist public officials with understanding and complying with provisions of public meetings law. We have some other laws in our jurisdiction too, so I'll talk about those a bit. But we're focused on public meetings law today. So we are going to be giving this training. I know we are in a public meeting as well, so it will be recorded for you. Just know that, of course, we want to make sure that information stays up to date. Knowing that there is a legislative session going on, just remember that sometimes things do change, so make sure to pay attention to that. But as of this moment, it is the most up to date. So a few things to know. One, the training itself and the information we'll be discussing today is intended to explain the requirements of public meetings law and provide OGEC's interpretation of those requirements. It shouldn't be a substitute of reviewing the statutes and rules themselves. Anytime you have a question about public meetings law, it is a great idea to start looking at the statutes and rules themselves. That's a great place to start because that's what the law is. Second thing, of course, this training is not designed to be a substitute for legal advice, and it should not be viewed as constituting legal advice. I just kind of like to say that every situation has its own set of specific details, and there might be other laws or regulations not within the jurisdiction of OGEC that might regulate your governing body's activities. But of course, if you do ever have a situation arise and you do have questions about it, you can get guidance from our staff. Give us a call. We have the answers when it comes to public meetings law. We're available Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 to provide you with assistance. I'll talk a little bit more about advice later on, but we do want you to know that we're available for that help. So a little bit about OGEC and why we're the ones giving this training. You might have heard about us before. This might be your first time learning about us. We began in 1974. That's when Oregon voters enacted ethics law. So that's things like conflicts of interest, prohibited use of office, gifts, nepotism. So when they enacted ethics law, it also created our commission, which is a 9-volunteer member board who is also there appointed by the governor and the legislative assembly, and then confirmed by a vote of the Senate. And then it created our agency as well. We're a relatively small staff of about 15. So our commission and our agency work together to enforce the 3 areas of law in our jurisdiction. We obviously have ethics law. We then have lobby law. That's where lobbyists have to register and then quarterly report their expenditures. And now we have public meetings law. So public meetings law is a little bit unique in that it was actually enacted in 1973, which makes it a little bit older than ethics law, right? But no one was given jurisdiction of it. It wasn't until the 1990s that we were given jurisdiction of just the executive session provisions, so why you can have closed meetings sometimes. And then finally in September of 2023, we were given jurisdiction of all of it. So that's why we can now give advice and trainings on public meetings law and why we're here today. So now that it is in our jurisdiction with this training, our goals today are one, that you walk away with a overview of public meetings law and that you're familiar with it. It can get complex sometimes. You're probably not going to remember every single thing, but you're going to have an idea and be comfortable with it. And know that if you ever have questions, you know where to go. You'll know what the resources are and where you can go with those questions. So those are our big 2 goals. Now, I mentioned this a little bit, but if you do have questions, completely normal. Our goal is to answer those questions today. So if you do have those, put those in the chat. Like I said, Ruth will answer them there and we'll go over them at the end of each section verbally. And we'll also pause. So if you have more questions, you can ask those in that moment. The only thing to know is that the training is set to kind of go over those general overview questions. If you do have a very specific question where we're going to have to get more details, go into kind of that specific details and specific situation, that is more of an advice situation, which we're just going to let you know we need to get more details. Let's talk about this as an advice situation. You're going to have to reach out to us. We'll talk about that. So just so you're aware of that. But we're going to start today to get some more information from you, a little bit of a pop quiz, find out what you already know about public meetings law. This gives us better understanding of what you already know going into this. So we have a poll from Zoom. It's going to pop up on your screen. Has 8 questions. Just going to answer it what you already know about public meetings law. It is entirely anonymous, so if you don't know something quite yet, take your best guess. One thing to know about Zoom, you do have to scroll and answer all 8 before you hit submit. The scrolling isn't always the easiest to see, so sometimes we do see some people just answer 1 or 2 and then hit submit. We just can't resend it, so just being aware of that. But let me go ahead and get that on your screens, and you'll see that in just a moment. Okay, let's see. All right, that should be popping up on your screens now. So answer those 8 questions. I'll go quiet for a few minutes to give everyone the chance to answer those, and we'll come back when we see everyone has answered.
Katie, I can't vote because I'm a panelist.
Yeah, I can't vote
Same
either.
here.
Okay.
Hosts and panelists cannot vote.
That is a technical issue. Well, I did not realize that that wouldn't work with the panelists. So that is, sometimes we see that happen. Okay, well, what we'll do then, we will, this happens. We will just actually skip that then, and then we will just go over the questions together as we view them in the presentation. So just because we don't have them put in through this with Zoom. That's okay though. It happens. So that's the only thing with Zoom. Every meeting is held a little bit differently. So thank you for letting me know. That's okay. Thank you, Katie, for all your work putting those questions in. Sorry we didn't get to use them. But let's go ahead then. Okay, well, that's fine. So that just means less work for you guys. You didn't have to do a pop quiz. So, okay. So then we'll start talking, before we get into what we're going to talk about, one thing that's really important to understand is the accountability, because this applies to all of public meetings law. So who is responsible for ensuring that all of public meetings law is being followed? So it is the governing body members who are individually held accountable for ensuring that public meetings law is followed. So when we at OGEC receive complaints about possible public meetings law violations, cases are opened on each governing body member. And this is regardless of whether you have staff support on any tasks. So those cases aren't going to be opened on staff, who supported the governing body with administrative tasks. Governing body members also need to know that they're responsible for both their actions and non-actions. So as a governing body member, if you see something that's not correct, you do want to speak up to your governing body or public body to make sure that it's corrected. And, just saying that you didn't know something was a violation, or, maybe you didn't see a meeting notice, that doesn't mean that you aren't responsible. And lastly, along with those cases, if we did have a case appear before us and the commission did find that there was a violation, and if there was a fine issued, that fine would also be the responsibility of that individual governing body member. That fine can't be paid with public money. So just making sure as we go through all these topics today, we do understand that responsibility is on that on the individual governing body member. So the topics we're going to talk about today, we're going to start with resources, where you can go when you do have questions about public meetings law. Then we'll look at the key statutory definitions. This is the longest section. I will give you that little warning. So just be prepared for that. But it is worth it. We need to know these terms. Then we'll get into the requirements of public meetings, the attendance and location requirements, the accommodations and accessibilities of a meeting, the meeting noticing, the recording and minutes of a meeting. And then we'll talk about the grievance process, the enforcement of public meetings law, and briefly talk on the training requirement. So One thing I do also like to point out here is that we are just focusing on public meetings law, but that is often the foundation of public meetings. There are oftentimes other regulations, other statutes, sometimes even your own governing body's policies that layer on top and add to, what's regulating your public meetings. But those are outside of our jurisdiction at OGEC, so we are only focusing on public meetings law. I might bring up some things, if I'm aware that they kind of run into that, but just so you know, we are only talking about public meetings law today. All right, so let's talk about resources first. Obviously, if you ever have a question about public meetings law, your governing body's legal counsel is a great place to start. If you are part of an association, sometimes they have special district association, those kinds of things. They often provide legal counsel resources. Those are available to you. That's one place you can start. At the beginning, when I was talking about the statutes and rules, great place to start there as well, because that is the law itself. As we go through the slides, the ORS, which is the statute, and the OAR, the rules, those will be noted in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. We'll also often reference those when we give you advice about things. So I'll mention those throughout. And then we will be mentioning a couple different guides, handouts, and links to things. You don't have to worry about writing those down. After this, I will be sending you a follow-up email that has links to all of those. So you will get an email with all of that. And then, of course, us at OGEC, we are a resource for you, both our staff and our website. On our website, we do have an entire section dedicated to public meetings law. We have a FAQ section, information and resources portion. You can also sign up for additional trainings if you ever need a refresher. And we do all of that follow-up email that we send with all those links. Those are stored on our website. So if you ever lose that email, want to see if we've created anything new, you can check there. If you do ever need advice on a specific situation, you can request that through our website. And then we do have a quarterly newsletter where we send updates on public meetings law and the other laws in our jurisdiction. So you can always sign up for that if you'd like to stay connected with us. So something to know about our advice, if you do ever need to request it, is we are able to provide advice and guidance on how the laws in our jurisdiction apply to future or hypothetical situations. Fancy way of just saying we can only give advice on things that haven't happened yet, right? We can't give advice on actions you've already taken, can't change the actions you've already taken. But we do have different levels of advice, and each offers a different level of safe harbor protection if a complaint were to be filed. You do also have to follow our advice. That's an important step. But all advice and guidance issued that's signed by our executive director or higher is also available on our website as a public record. So you can also look at previously issued advice, which can be helpful. The advice and opinions are written by our staff, and then depending on the level, they are reviewed by some coordination or combination, of our compliance and enforcement coordinator, executive director, and some even go all the way up to our assistant attorney general. So if you do ever need advice, you can send us an email, give us a phone call, request on our website, or if you're ever in Salem, even come into our office. We're available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Now, I did mention the statutes and rules. So the rules are there to help, provide a little bit more clarification and guidance on some of those statutes. We will mention Division 50 heavily. That was one, we published those in October of 2024 after we got the jurisdiction of public meetings law. That contains everything on public meetings law. But we also have Division 40 with executive session. I know your group does not use that as much, so we won't really refer to that today, but Division 50 is where you'd be looking. And the last resource I'll mention is the Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual. This is something we recommend for every governing body member. Our office uses it pretty much on a daily basis. It's a link we will send you in that follow-up email. What's really great about it is it includes public records law and public meetings law. Public records law being one of those things that often comes up in public meetings, but we are, it's not within our jurisdiction, so we cannot give advice on it. So it is nice to have that. The only thing to know is that the 2024 version is the most current, but they were finalizing it just as we were finishing our rulemaking. So you do want to look at the rules and the AG manual at the same time to get the most correct information. But that will be all the resources. So if you ever have a question, those are where you can go to look for that information for public meetings law. So now knowing our resources, we may still have a question every once in a while of when do we need to hold a public meeting? The answer is pretty clear because most of the time it's always, right? That's the law. But if we are ever unsure, we can look at the definition of a meeting itself. Because the law says that a meeting happens when we have a convening of a governing body, of a public body, for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision on any matter. So anytime we have that, we have a meeting. But it's also one of those definitions that gives us a lot of new terms, and so we should define each of those. And we're going to start with public body here. So public body, this one is the state, any regional council, county, city, or district, or any municipal or public corporation. It also includes any agency of those bodies. So boards, departments, commissions, councils, bureaus, committees, subcommittees, advisory groups, those are all public bodies as well. If you're ever unsure whether an entity is a public body, a good gauge is if it was created by or pursuant to like the state constitution, a statute, administrative rule, bylaw, or other official act. Just know that a single public official, like the governor, is not considered a public body under public meetings law. But all our state, local, and special government bodies are public bodies. And once we know public body, we can then define governing body, because a governing body is two or more members of any public body who have the authority to make decisions for or recommendations to that public body on policy or administration. So at OGEC, our commission is the governing body, our agency is the public body. Your advisory committee is the governing body. The public body who you're making recommendations to is the public body. But we can actually further define the governing body into two types, specifically in how they are making that role on or how they are making those, decisions or referrals, recommendations, that's the word I'm looking for, to that public body on their policy or administration. So we have the decision-making bodies. These are the ones that have the authority to make decisions. Very shocking, it's in the name, right? And they often have the ability to actually exercise governmental power and act on behalf of the public body. So these are going to be like the city councils, school boards, state boards and commissions, the fire district boards. Again, the ones that have the authority to make decisions. The other ones are the advisory bodies. Their authority is to make recommendations on policy or administration. And we often see these formed a couple different ways. So a governing body can create an advisory body. Maybe, a city council or school board creates an advisory group to give it recommendations, or they can be formed by a statute or charter. Statute creates a budget committee or an advisory group. That can also, so both of those are governing bodies. The only thing to be careful about with advisory bodies is the fact that a governing body can make them. So if your advisory group decided that, hey, we have something else we need, more recommendations on, and we're not really sure how to do this, we want to create another group to give us more recommendations on this. You could create another advisory group to do that, but in doing so, you would be creating an advisory body, which is a governing body, and therefore it would have to comply with public meetings law. It would have its own quorum. It would have to have open meetings. So a lot of times governing bodies don't realize they have that power and can sometimes create advisory bodies and not realize they have done that, and that body also needs to follow public meetings law. If you're ever unsure of that, that's a great time to reach out to us with the details, and we can give you advice on, whether that body does qualify as an advisory body or not. So, and why it can get difficult is because there are two types of bodies that are not considered governing bodies. So we have a fact gathering body. This one is a body that only has the authority to gather and provide purely factual information to a public body. Has no authority to make decisions or recommendations. And that seems pretty simple, but we do still have to be careful because we have definitely seen where people are going to get that information ready to present, and they know what the governing body is looking for, and in that decide, oh, they're looking for this, we're just going to leave this information out, we're only going to show them this information. That in itself could be construed as a recommendation. So we still need to be really careful there that we are just, gathering and providing purely factual information. And the second body that is not a governing body is one that is advising an individual public official. And this one has 3 criteria that need to be met. The body needs to be appointed by the individual public official. It needs to be making recommendations only to that individual public official. And that individual public official needs to be able to act on that recommendation without having to pass it on unchanged to the public body. So you have to meet all 3 of those criteria to be this body advising an individual public official. And again, one of those situations, if you're ever unsure, that's a great time to reach out to us for advice. But once we know public body and governing body, we can look at quorum, which is much simpler. It is just the minimum number of your governing body members needed to transact business. Most governing bodies do have a policy, rule, bylaw saying what their quorum is. For example, our commission, 9 members, we have a rule saying our quorum is 5. So that's what it is. But if your governing body does not have a rule or policy, it would just be the simple majority of your governing body. So now we can look at convening. We're going to actually look at a few definitions here, starting with communication. Pretty simple. We all know what communication is, but we do need to understand that all forms of communication are considered under public meetings law. So communication is expressing or transmitting information to another person through verbal, nonverbal. This does include gestures, thumbs up, thumbs down, sign language, written or electronic means. So all of those forms of communication are considered. And that's important because convening is just the way our governing bodies are gathering and communicating. And it can look like a couple different ways. We could be gathering in a physical location to communicate. We could be using technology to communicate in real time, like right now. Or we could be using serial electronic written communication, or even using an intermediary to communicate among members. So this is an and/or situation where multiple could be happening at once or just singular. But we're actually going to talk about those last 2 a little bit more, serial communications and intermediaries, because those are very important. Starting with intermediaries. So intermediary in the simplest terms is just someone who is relaying information from one person to another. In the context of public meetings law, it's someone who is facilitating communications among governing body members about a matter subject to deliberation or decision by the governing body. So an intermediary could be anyone, but most often it is governing body members themselves or staff members. Let's give an example. I'm on a 5-person council. I'll be Counselor A. After a meeting, I run to the grocery store and I run into Counselor B. And we start talking about a voting ordinance that's coming before our council next week. And so we just share our opinions on it, right? Just the 2 of us, it's fine, Counselor A and Counselor B. But Counselor B goes home, and on my way home, I get a phone call from Counselor C. And Counselor C and I start talking, and I share the conversation that Counselor B and I had about that voting ordinance. Well, in that example, I am the intermediary because I shared the conversation that Counselor B and I had, and I facilitated those communications about that matter that's subject to deliberation or decision by our governing body. So as an intermediary, and that also brings us to serial communications. So serial communications, these are just a series of communications of any kind that are used outside of a meeting conducted in compliance with public meetings law. What's really important is that the law says a quorum of governing body members cannot use serial communications to deliberate or decide on any matter within the governing body's jurisdiction. So, prohibited serial communications, a quorum of governing body members cannot deliberate or decide on any matter within a governing body's jurisdiction outside of a meeting. Those are the key points there. So serial communications can look like all kinds of different things. Could be in-person conversations, telephone conversations, video conferencing, written communications. This includes emails, texts, social media posts, conversations via intermediaries, or any other ways of conveying information. But if we go back to that intermediary example, I was an intermediary. I also turned it into a prohibited serial communication because we were on a council of 5, which meant our quorum was 3. And when I shared that with Counselor C, I shared that communication amongst 3 of us, which turned that into our quorum, which means that was a prohibited serial communication. And that was a in-person conversation, intermediary, as well as a telephone conversation. So there was a couple different methods of communication there. Same thing if we had, 5-person council, someone posted on social media saying, hey, our council's voting on this next week. I don't agree with it. Another counselor gave a thumbs up. Someone else commented in the comments saying, actually, I do agree with it. Here's why. Again, we have 3 people, a quorum, deliberating on something within the governing body's jurisdiction outside of a meeting. So we do have a FAQ section on our website about this because there has been, a lot of interest in this, which makes sense. And we'll have a handout that we'll email to you that goes over a couple different situations. But really with prohibited serial communications, we just want to make sure a quorum of governing body members aren't deliberating or deciding on matters outside of public meetings. That is the core of it. And sometimes after we talk about serial communications, we do get the worried, okay, so we can't talk to our governing body members outside of meetings whatsoever. And that's not true. There are forms of communication between governing body members that don't fall under public meetings law. The law actually lists 3 types of communication that aren't considered under public meetings law. So the first one is communication that's purely factual or educational in nature. It conveys no deliberation or decisions that might reasonably come before your governing body. One example would be this training. So you could actually have this training with your governing body members, talk about it outside of a meeting, and it would not be considered a serial communication, right? So long as your governing body wasn't the one making decisions about public meetings law. It would just be purely educational communication. The second one is a little bit similar. It's just communications that are not related to any matter that at any time could reasonably be foreseen to come before your governing body for deliberation or decision. So examples of this are often like social gatherings and events that aren't, don't have anything to do with your governing body. Again, as long as you make sure there aren't any discussions about official business. And then the last one here are communications that are anything non-substantive in nature. Typically, we see scheduling and logistics, those kind of things falling into this. A common example, a staff member sends out an email to all of the governing body members saying, hey, don't forget the next meeting. Here's the link to join. A governing body hits reply all, a governing body member, hits reply all and says, I won't be able to make this one, sorry. That's not going to be a prohibited serial communication because that was just a scheduling. They're not going to make it. Now, if we start talking about agenda items, we get back into potential prohibited serial communications. Always be careful with that reply all button is just my tip there. But just those scheduling and logistics conversations, those are non-substantive. So the other 2 words we use a lot in those last few slides are decision and deliberate. So let's define those because those are important to know what the law says they are. So decision is first. This might be another one that seems pretty like, yes, I know what a decision is, but it does have a specific definition under the law. So in order to conduct our business of a governing body, a vote of a quorum is required to take an action. That could be a determination, vote, final disposition, or other action on a matter such as a motion, order, proposal, measure, ordinance, or resolution. So basically we have our quorum taking an action on a matter for that to be a decision under public meetings law. And we also have the decision-making process, which is just how what our governing body is engaging in to make that decision. Typically 5 steps, sometimes you move them around, maybe skip one, but usually you have to identify the decision that needs to be made. Then you gather information related to that decision. You identify and assess any alternatives. before you weigh and consider the final information to make the decision itself. And this decision-making process is important because it leads us to deliberate. And the definition of deliberate here is just the discussion or communication that's part of that decision-making process. And when we do say discussion here, that's just consideration or debate of the matter. And then, of course, remembering again that communications can be verbal, nonverbal, written, or electronic. So to making sure we understand that even if we aren't making the decision itself, if we are in that decision-making process, we are deliberating, and that is an important thing to understand, especially as we consider serial communications. All right, so that means we know what makes up a meeting. Let's also cover the types of meetings that apply to public meetings law. So we have regular meetings. These are regularly scheduled meetings. Special meetings, any meetings outside of your regularly scheduled meetings. Emergency meetings, meetings you have to hold because of an emergency. Executive sessions, those are the closed meetings the law allows in certain cases. And then these last ones, we typically see them called work sessions or workshops, but they're meetings that are held to allow the governing body to prepare for regular special meetings, or even to give them the opportunity to engage in like preliminary discussion or deliberations. We're definitely, though, deliberating, in that decision-making process. Those also need to comply with public meetings law. Now, there are two situations, though, that are outlined in the law as not meetings. So first one is any on-site inspection of a project or program. So if your governing body decided it wanted to go tour a project up in the state, you'd be able to tour that project, talk about that project. It wouldn't necessarily need to be a meeting. Just make sure that, the conversation sticks to the project. It couldn't turn into, oh, let's also, while we're here and all together, let's decide on, we need to take this vote really quick. No, that still needs to happen in a public meeting. You can only, only that inspection and that conversation about that project could occur at that inspection. So still making sure there's a distinction there. And then the second is the attendance of your governing body members at any national, regional, or state association to which the public body or its members belong. So if your public body is part of any organization that holds like an annual conference, usually we see this like with League of Oregon Cities, School Board Association. I know those don't necessarily apply to this group, but those are the easiest examples. They typically have annual conferences. You'd be fine to attend those, talk about the trainings there. We still just need to be careful, though, that we are not having conversations about the matters that are coming before our governing body for deliberation or decision. So again, just being careful what we're talking about at these two things that aren't meetings, but we can attend those and they would not be meetings per the law. So now we can go back to our initial question that we asked at the very beginning of this section of when do we need to hold a public meeting? Well, we know now when we have a quorum of a governing body, of a public body, convening in order to make a decision or to deliberate toward a decision on any matter, that we have a meeting. And our Oregon form of government requires an informed public aware of the deliberations and decisions of governing bodies and the information upon which such decisions were made. So really, this means that any meeting held by a governing body must be open to the public, and a meeting can only be closed to the public when a specific statute allows it. Really, the purpose of public meetings law is to make sure that our governing bodies are making decisions in a way that's open and transparent. All right, we made it through the definition section. Like I said, it is the longest one, so I'm glad we got through that. Any questions in the chat, Ruth? I'll check with you first, and then we can open it up.
Actually, I have a question about the chat feature. I just want to make sure that if there are questions that I'm able to see them, because I don't see any questions in the chat at this time.
Perfect. I think, and we did test the chat in the beginning, so it should be working. So, okay, perfect. Anybody want to come off mute and ask a question then? That is also an option here.
I don't have a question. I would just say this is really helpful just to go over these rules again. And it's always tricky about the email communication, so I appreciate touching on that one.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Glad to hear that. Greg, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a quick question here regarding the work that we do. So let's say if there's our committee needs to discuss like confidential or redacted portions of a National Register nomination form, like a sensitive site location or something like that. How does the law allow for us to enter to do that? Is it like an executive session, and what are those procedural steps for that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are some executive session provisions that do talk about confidential information. We don't have it, we didn't put time in today to talk about executive session provisions just because you don't have that. That is not something you're doing right now. But that is definitely something that we could look at in an advice situation if you'd like to. But there are some provisions in the law that do allow. There is one specifically for executive session provisions that if it is exempt from public inspection per public records law, there is one that lets you meet in executive session, but it does have to be exempt by public records law. If it isn't exempt by public records law, then you would still need a public meeting. So that's where it kind of depends on that.
And if you're interested in more information about executive sessions, we actually have a webinar next week at Thursday at 2 p.m. We have a webinar that's all about executive session provisions, if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, so we can go into, I don't want to go too into depth in that because that section alone can go 30 minutes to an hour because you have to do that correctly as well. That is a big part. But definitely we can provide some information on that. So as long as it meets that statute, then yes, you can go into executive session for that. I would also like talking with legal counsel. That's also a good thing to check in with them on because they would have the better, since we can't give advice on public records law, they would be a good place to check in with that. But if it doesn't meet that provision, then right now it would still need to be a public meeting.
Thank you. And it was just a general question. I don't have a need to follow up with any specifics. Thanks.
Yeah, of course, definitely. All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead since we don't have the poll questions. What I'm going to do then is I do have the questions now on the screen. So we'll go through the questions one by one, and you can answer in the chat. It is not anonymous, so you're not going to be graded, but people will see your answers. So just know that. But now that we've gone through the information, you're going to know a little bit more. So the first question we have here is who is accountable for public meetings law violation complaints filed with OGEC? We have A for staff, B for governing body members, C for staff and governing body members. And if you just want to put your answer in the chat, and you can put it to either host and panelists or everyone, whichever you prefer. I can see both. We can see, yeah. Okay, perfect. I see everyone answering. I'll give a few seconds. Yeah, okay. All right. Yep. So I see, yes, overwhelmingly, yeah, I see all the answers coming in. It is B, governing body members. That is who we are seeing there. Yeah. Great job, everyone. Yeah. Even if staff are helping part of the law, it is the governing body members who are individually responsible. Nice job. Okay. So the second question is about advisory bodies. So what determines if a subcommittee is an advisory body subject to public meetings law? Members are appointed by a public or governing body, and A, the purpose is that the individuals will make their own recommendations. B, the purpose is that individuals will make recommendations by group or vote. C, the purpose is purely to gather facts and make no recommendations. Or D, all of the above. I will say this one is a little bit of a trick question, so we'll go over that. But put your answers in the chat and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, I see a couple. Okay, so this one is B. So the purpose, we need to be making recommendations. If we're just purely gathering facts and making no recommendations, it is not an advisory body. You'd be that fact gathering body. What we didn't go over was the by group or vote, because that has been some language that has changed. So this is basically just a trick question. So do not. I don't like this question anymore, but we haven't updated it quite yet. So do not feel bad. That's a trick question. Don't bother. Okay, this last question though, not a trick question. This one is a good answer. The governing body is using a Google document to do collaborative work outside of meetings. Members can edit this at any time. Is this a violation of public meetings law? We have A, yes, this is an example of serial communication, and a quorum has access to contribute, edit, and review what has been shared outside a meeting. B, no, because while all the members can edit the document, the content will be discussed at a future public meeting. Or C, no, because in addition to the governing body members, the public also has access to this document. What do we think on this one? Okay, see a couple. Yeah, looks like we are in agreement here. Yes. This is an example of serial communication. Your quorum has access to contribute, edit, and review. And yeah, if you are commenting back and forth about items for decision and deliberation outside of a public meeting, that could be prohibited serial communication. So definitely have to be careful there. We do also have an advisory opinion about using like Google Documents because our tech wants us to be collaborative. That can be hard in today's world. So it is the Gaines opinion if you are curious in that. And we can also include a link to that in the follow-up email. I'll make a note to myself if you are curious in reading that. So we'll do that.
And
okay. Yeah.
Lex, with that one, it just said collaborate. It didn't specifically say to deliberate or make a decision.
Yeah.
So
and
like if
why,
we're just pulling information together.
Yes. And that's why it's an example of serial communications and there's a potential for prohibited. That is where if it is just information gathering, it could potentially be okay. But if we do start gathering information related to a decision and then we start talking about that, that's where we easily get into the prohibited. So that is where it gets very tricky. And that's why I also will, that FAQ I was talking about with the prohibited serial communications, that will definitely be included in that follow-up email because that kind of goes into that. But that's where we do have to be careful because currently deliberate is that decision-making process. So even if you're just gathering information for the decision to be made, that is included in the deliberation process at this time. So we still have to be careful there. And that's also why I said the Gaines opinion goes over that too. So it is one of those situations where it's an example of serial communication and there's the potential for prohibited communication, serial communications. It does depend what exactly is going on. So does that kind of go into that a little bit? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Prohibited serial communications, they can get complicated. It has some gray area there. Yeah, a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Lex. This is fascinating to me because I know how our tribal government does things too. So it's really interesting. And it's also really, really strict. And so I'm just curious how often I'm just wondering, I mean, really by these definitions, there's not a lot of talking you can do, even with a couple people, because then that's deliberating, right? And you need to have a meeting. So I'm just wondering how often this gets prosecuted, or how often this law gets followed up on, because I feel like by the definitions here, that especially if you're in a small government. So I'm just looking at it from that point of view, but it's interesting.
No, that's definitely a good question. We do, when we go into the enforcement of the law towards the end, I will cover that a little bit more and talk about that process and what that looks like. We are, just to give kind of a little bit more, we are a complaint-based enforcement. So we only look into things when people submit a complaint to us, and public meetings law has a little bit extra with a grievance process. So we'll talk about that. But we definitely have seen more of that since we've taken jurisdiction of public meetings law. But I will talk about more in the enforcement section just because I don't want to get too far off of that. But I will take some time to go over that because that is a fair question for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. So now that we've covered definitions, we're going to talk about the requirements for public meetings. And as we talk about that, some of these are administrative functions, right? Or things that at least administrative staff will be helping with, especially as we talk about like the attendance and location requirements, the accessibility of a meeting, the noticing requirements, the recording in minutes, and even the grievance process towards the end. But even if staff is helping us, we do have to remember it's still the governing body member's responsibility to, check in, make sure it is complying with the provisions of public meetings law. I'll say that a lot, but it is just a good reminder for it. So we'll start with the attendance and meeting location requirements. Towards the end of that last section, I was talking about how all meetings of a governing body of a public body need to be open to the public. And all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting, except as otherwise permitted by the law. So a quorum of your governing body cannot meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating toward a decision on any matter, except as otherwise permitted by the law. Another thing we'll talk about too is public comment and disruptions. So generally, public meetings law only requires the public be allowed to access meetings, not that the public be allowed to comment or testify at meetings. Again, it's really focused on making sure people have access to the meetings, not necessarily that we get their input. But there are oftentimes other statutes, other things at play, or even your governing body's own policy that says, no, we want people's input. We want to have their comments and testimony. That's fine. You are totally allowed to have that public comment at your meetings. If you do allow public comment, what public meetings law says is that it is up to the governing body and the presiding officer to maintain the decorum of the meeting, and that you may limit public participation accordingly. I'll also say the AG manual is a good resource. It does have about another paragraph or two, so a little bit more. And then also your legal counsel too, if you do ever have a situation. And you can reach out to us for advice if a specific scenario arises. But in general, this is what public meetings law says about these comment and disruptions. Okay, so let's then focus on location requirements to ensure the public has access to our meetings. If we are having an in-person element to our meetings, we need to make sure that public meetings are not held at places that discriminate based on race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, age, or disability. In addition to that, it is discrimination on the basis of disability for a governing body to meet in a place inaccessible to persons with disabilities. We do link to the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and on ada.gov in that follow-up email to get more information on that. But we just want to make sure that we're meeting in an accessible meeting location. Now, it's also discrimination to fail to make a good faith effort to have an interpreter for persons who are deaf or hard of hearing if they're requested for a regularly scheduled meeting. So what are the requirements for that request? Well, one, the person requesting the interpreter needs to give your governing body at least 48 hours notice of that request. We'll talk about this in the noticing section, but this is why it's important to get out your meeting notices as soon as you can. It also needs to obviously include the name of the person making the request, and then any sign language preference, and then any other relevant information that the governing body can request. Now, if you do have a meeting that's being held with less than 48 hours notice, reasonable effort shall be made to have an interpreter present, but the requirement for an interpreter does not apply to emergency meetings. When you are making those requests for deaf and hard of hearing services, you can do that through the Oregon Department of Human Services website. This is another link we'll share in that follow-up email. In addition, your governing body needs to hold its meetings within the geographical boundaries of its jurisdiction. That could be at the main office or administrative headquarters or the nearest practical location. For state, county, city, or special district groups that are within land owned by a federally recognized Oregon tribe, meetings can be held within that territory as long as within the boundaries of the state. Obviously, for a state agency, board, or commission, that's pretty easy because your boundary is the entire state, so we're good there. Other public bodies sometimes have a harder time with them, figuring out what exactly their jurisdiction is, but Sometimes the situation may arise where you'll have multiple governing bodies meeting, or even a governing body meeting with like the elected official or federally recognized Oregon tribe, and you may not know whose jurisdiction to meet in. But in that situation, meetings would just need to be held in one of the jurisdictions or at the nearest practical location. Obviously, it's also a lot easier if one of those jurisdictions is the entire state. In the event of an actual emergency necessitating immediate action, meetings can also be held in locations other than those described in the law. Examples of emergencies are going to be like floods, fires, major weather events, those things that really make your typical locations unusable. Now, training sessions can be held outside of your jurisdiction as long as no deliberations toward a decision are involved. As soon as we start deliberating and deciding on things, we're back, that needs to be a public meeting. We need to make sure we are following all the laws and the requirements for that. So now we can talk more about electronic and telephone meetings. Just going to use virtual. That's kind of the easiest word without having to say that over and over. But any governing body meeting, even including executive sessions, can be held virtually. If you are holding it virtually, public meetings law still applies. And if you are holding it only virtually, you need to make sure the public still has a way to listen or watch the meeting in real time. And this can be done one of two ways. It can be you are providing a physical location where they can, watch it on a screen or have it on the phone that they can listen into. Or it can be done by providing that electronic means where they have a call-in number, link to join, or they're watching a live video feed. Just making sure that the public can still access that virtual meeting. Now, regardless of how the meeting is held, to the extent possible, your governing body must provide the public provide the opportunity to attend virtually. So even for an in-person meeting, you should still, to the extent possible, have the opportunity to attend virtually. Again, that can be a call-in number, meeting link, or video feed. And if you are having like a hybrid meeting, in-person and virtual, if you are allowing the in-person attendees to, provide in-person or written testimony, you need to make sure the virtual attendees can also give oral testimony virtually or written testimony electronically. So just making sure we have the same opportunities to give that comment or testimony for our virtual attendees as for our physical attendees. All right, and that's it for the attendance and location questions. A little bit shorter there. I don't think I'm seeing anything in the comments. Perfect. Okay. Anyone have a question they wanted to ask before we moved on to the question here? All right, I'm not hearing anyone or seeing any hands. So this one, we just have one question to check here. And this is, what accommodations are you required to give under public meetings law? We have A, meet an accessible location, B, meet in an accessible location and provide an interpreter if requested, no matter what. C, meet in an accessible location and make a good faith effort to provide an interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting. Or D, nothing is required. And you can put that in the chat. I see all of those coming in. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I see those coming in. And yes, that is correct. We need to meet an accessible location and make that good faith effort to provide an interpreter if requested at least 48 hours before the meeting. Nice job. Okay, so now we're going to talk about noticing then. Again, this is one that typically we see staff either doing entirely or at least, helping with. We still as governing body members need to make sure we're checking the notice, making sure it's posted on time, because it is still the responsibility of governing body members. So in order for the public to be aware of a public meeting, our governing body needs to issue a notice to the general public, to interested persons who have requested notice, and to the media who have requested notice. For regular meetings, this notice needs to be issued at least 48 hours before the meeting is held. A lot of governing bodies, get that out earlier than that. That's totally fine. At least 48 hours though, that was something that was updated with the rulemaking session. It's to make it so that there's that minimum to work with that interpreter requirement, right? But if you can get it out earlier than that, that's great. Sometimes there are other statutes, depending on what you're meeting about, that also require some earlier notice, but at least 48 hours is that minimum. So where do you need to be posting that? Well, to satisfy the general public requirement, it needs to be posted in an obvious place on your public body or governing body's website. And for state agencies and educational service districts, you're also required to post to the Oregon Transparency website. That's just basically one big calendar of Oregon open meetings. Now, additional places you can post, we list these for, some governing bodies don't have websites. That's not a problem for your body, but to meet that additional, interested persons who have requested notice or media have requested notice, you can also post in the newspaper, bulletin boards, social media accounts, email lists, mailing lists. Most often we see like emailing lists, social media accounts. Those are there to help that interested persons who have requested notice and media who have requested notice. But these are the places you would post that notice. Now, what needs to be in the notice? This is what I like to call the what, where, when, and why, the one place the public should be able to look to get all the information about the meeting. So we need to have the date and time, the location, that should be both if there's going to be, the in-person, the physical location, and then any virtual information. And then what's going to be talked about at the meeting. So this could be just the list of subjects, or it could be the agenda. If you do provide the agenda, your governing body is still able to amend up to and during the meeting. And then it needs to have the contact information for requesting that interpreter or any other communication aids. For contact information, it does specifically need the name, telephone number, and email address of the person they should contact for that. If you do ever have an executive session, you do also need to have the citation of that on your notice. No, that's not really important here, but we do like to call that out. So this is an example of an old meeting notice for us. It doesn't have to be pretty. It can just be a Word document. It just needs to have all the information. That's really what's important. So you can see we have the time and date, November 1st, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. has the location, our Salem address, as well as the call-in number and the link to join. And then it has the contact information, has Becky's name, phone number, and email, and then our agenda, which obviously goes a lot longer than that, but it has all of that in one place. And that's what's most important. Now for special meetings, same information and where it needs to be posted, but for the special meetings, they get posted at least 24 hours in advance. So a little bit different timing. And you just need to make sure that it especially gets to members of the governing body, news media who have requested notice, and the general public. And emergency meetings. So in the event of an actual emergency, your governing body can notice an emergency meeting with less than 24 hours notice. But you do need to make sure you do a few things. One, you still need to notice the meeting as soon as possible. And you need to make sure you still contact media and interested persons. And still post your meeting notice in the usual locations. And finally, the minutes for that meeting need to describe the emergency that justified the less than 24 hours notice. So you can have this emergency meeting, just need to make sure you still follow these so that it complies with public meetings law. All right, that's it for noticing. I don't see any questions in the chat. Any questions that anyone wanted to ask verbally before we answer a poll question? Yeah, I see a hand up.
Thanks, Lex. This isn't a question, but I just wanted to speak to what I do for noticing for all of you. So we generally notice the SACHP meetings 70 days in advance to give certified local governments plenty of time. I emailed you all with the agenda and the nominations for review that same day. Those materials went up online for the public to access. And at the same time, we sent hard copy letters in the mail announcing that to certified local governments, chief elected local officials, property owners, the preparers of the nominations, and Oregon's federally recognized tribes as well. And then 15 days before the meeting, we do post the agenda and the announcement of the meeting on the governor's transparency website as well and release it to the media. So that is how we are covering these public noticing requirements. And if you look at the agenda, at the bottom of the agenda, there is the information about how to request special accommodations with Kim's phone number and email address. And if you ever have any questions about how that process works or how we're doing it, please feel free to ask me.
That's amazing. Thank you. I love when we can come to these trainings and everyone knows what they're doing already. It's so great. And hearing that timeline is fantastic. So yes, that is perfect. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Well, if we don't have any other questions, then our polling question here, also just one question, pretty easy. We have, when do meeting notices need to be posted? A, within a reasonable amount of time for all meetings. B, within a reasonable amount of time for regular meetings, 24 hours before special meetings, and as much time as possible for emergency meetings. Or C, at least 48 hours before regular meetings, 24 hours before special meetings, and as much time as possible before emergency meetings. You can just put your answer in the chat. Oh yeah, I see some coming in already. Okay. All right, yeah, this one's pretty easy where we just talked about them so fast. Okay, yes, that one is C. We need that 48 hours for regular meetings, 24 for special, and as much time as possible before emergency. Okay, so now we're going to talk about recordings and minutes. Same thing where, yes, often staff is helping or doing this task. We still just want to make sure, check in with the minutes every once in a while, make sure it is complying. So what public meetings law says our governing body is required to provide is documentation of all our meetings in one of the following forms. It can be a sound, video, or digital recording, or written minutes. A lot of governing body members choose to keep multiple, especially, when we're using technology that can sometimes glitch or have failures. It's nice to have a backup just in case. But you do need at least one record of the meeting. And if you are doing written minutes, full transcripts are not required, but the written minutes do need to give a true reflection of the matters discussed and the views of the participants at that meeting. And then you just need to make sure that all minutes and recordings are available to the public within a reasonable time after the meeting. So what needs to be in your minutes? We need to have the names of the governing body members who are present, any motions, proposals, resolutions, orders, ordinances, measures, and their results that happened at that meeting, the results of all votes, the votes of each member by name. You only don't need to do this if your governing body has more than 25 members. Obviously, that doesn't apply here. Substance of any discussion from the meeting, and then reference to any documents discussed at the meeting. So that's all that needs to be in your minutes. We're going to talk about voting a little bit too. So all voting does need to be done by a public vote. The use of secret ballots is not allowed. And we do need to make sure that we're recording the results of all votes, which does include the vote of each governing body member by name. And if we are using written ballots, that's fine. The ballot just needs to identify the name of the governing body member, and the vote, including the member's name, needs to be announced during the meeting where the voting happened. We also like to go over some of the common questions we've gotten about voting, just because we get them a lot, so we just like to go over them. So first one we get a lot is, can a governing body vote by email? Typically, this is being asked, like, can we vote by email outside of a meeting, right? That would not be allowed. That's not a public vote. So no, that one doesn't work. The next one we get is, are electronic votes allowed? And that kind of depends on the setup. Are the votes visible to both physical and virtual attendees? Is it easy to see, how each member is voting? It's probably going to have to be treated like a physical or a written ballot where, it's announced who's their vote and how. If you are considering something like that, I do recommend just writing into us for advice so we can make sure it complies. But in most cases, we can probably make sure it complies. You just might need to take a few extra steps. And then the last thing we get a lot of questions on is about the vote of each governing body member by name, and how you would best do that. So roll call vote is best practice there, obviously, because you're just calling every governing body member's name. They say their vote. But even if you do a consent agenda, that's fine. Just whichever method of minutes, whether you're doing written minutes or an audio recording, needs to still record the vote of each governing body member by name. So even if in the meeting, written minutes are your record, in the meeting, whoever announces the vote, you have everyone vote in favor. They just say, motion passes unanimous. The written minutes would still need to write out every member that they voted yes, right? So just making sure that is followed. All right. The other thing to know with boards and commissions the other thing just to know with state agency board and commissions, I'll just bring this up. I know with an advisor, we'll double check with the advisory body but I'll just bring this up just in case. If you're recording your you need to record your electronic meetings and then post on a website or hosting service and then keep them posted there for at least 30 days. Obviously, this does not apply to executive session. This is for state boards and commissions that are within the executive department, though. So as I'm saying this, I don't necessarily think this applies. So maybe we just take that off. But we can double check on that. But what I'd like to usually say about this one is a lot of times when people are looking at public meetings law, specifically about recordings and minutes, they'll often then start looking, okay, when do I need to post it to, online? How long do I have to keep it posted there? Things like that. And beyond like this statute, and there's another one about school boards, public meetings law doesn't have that answer. That answer is in public records law, which is outside our jurisdiction. So that's when I like to say the AG manual is a good place to start, or even checking with your legal counsel. Public records advocate is also a good resource for that. But public meetings law doesn't have that answer beyond these two statutes. So, all right. Any questions about the recordings and minutes before we talk about the grievance process? We don't have a polling question for this one. All right. I'm not seeing any. Cool. All right. So let's move on to the grievance process then. So the grievance and complaint process. When we were given jurisdiction of public meetings law, they changed it that instead of just someone complaining to us at OGEC that they think a public meetings law violation happened, they now have to submit a grievance with the public body, give them the opportunity to answer, and then they can submit a complaint to OGEC. So that means there's some new requirements for public bodies as well. The public body basically has to let the public know when, where, how, and to whom those grievances can be filed. They need to post on the website who to submit grievances to. That's the person and the contact information to whom the grievance can be submitted to, and the regular business hours during which in-person grievances will be accepted. The rule does mention having a designated person for that, but if a person isn't listed, that grievance can be submitted to the public body's chief administrative officer or to the chair of the governing body instead. This one doesn't apply, but if for any reason you didn't have any governing body didn't have a website, they would just, any way they're providing notice of their meetings is the same way they provide notice of this information. But public bodies are required to accept these grievances in person during business hours via by first class mail, by email, and any other way they deem appropriate. So we're going to look at that grievance filing process now, starting with it from the viewpoint of someone who thinks a violation of public meetings law may have occurred, what they would do. Again, before they can file a complaint with us at OGEC, they have to file a grievance with the public body first. That means they need to submit a written grievance to the public body stating the facts and circumstances of the alleged violation. And they have to submit that within 30 days of the alleged violation occurring. And when we talk about all the days here, these are all calendar days. So all the timelines we're about to go over, all calendar days. And then they need to give the public body 21 days to respond to the written grievance. That's what we're looking at there. Now, we know that side. Let's look at what the public body does. Now, I also want to be clear, because we've talked a lot about governing body, that the grievance does list the public body as the one to respond, not the governing body. So public body is kind of the one in charge of this grievance process. There is some leeway there that the public body can designate who they want to do this. So that is something I often say, talk with staff and everyone, make sure you have figured out what the plan is for this. That is something to consider. But just knowing that in the rule and the statute itself, it is the public body that's named for the grievance process, not the governing body. So when a public body does receive a written grievance from a person alleging that it may have violated public meetings law, 1, it has 21 days to respond to that written grievance. 2, when it does respond, it has to acknowledge receipt of the grievance in one of three specific ways. Talk about that next. And three, when it does send the response, it has to copy us at OGEC into that response. There's a specific email here, pbgr@ogec.oregon.gov. PBGR does stand for Public Body Grievance Response. It's not the most intuitive acronym, I'll be honest. But you don't have to worry about writing that down or remembering that. That is on our email. And if at any time you are in this grievance process and don't remember the next step or aren't sure what to do next, that is a great time to reach out to us and we can help walk you through it. But when I said acknowledge receipt of the grievance, these are the three ways named in the law of how to do that. You can deny the facts and deny the violation, admit the facts and deny the violation, or admit the facts and admit the violation. So, denying the facts and denying the violation, you deny the facts and circumstances alleged, you describe the public body's version, and you'd explain why it's not a violation. Second option, to admit the facts and deny the violation, you'd admit the facts and circumstances alleged, but you deny that those facts and circumstances actually violate the law. And the third option, you would admit the facts and circumstances alleged, you'd admit that they do violate public meetings law, and then you explain the steps to cure the violation. So what your public body and governing body are going to do to fix it or make sure it doesn't happen again. Obviously, this is going to depend on what the violation was. If it was a decision, your governing body could rescind the decision. If you can't rescind the decision, it gets a little bit harder. You do have to hold a public meeting within 45 days of the original decision and acknowledge that, yes, your original decision did violate the law. There's good cause not to rescind it, but here's what your governing body is going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then if it's not a decision, could be something like updating a policy, updating a process, things like that. But these are the options you have to acknowledge receipt of the grievance. And you'll send that then, copy us at OGEC, and send that to whoever wrote the grievance. Once the public body responds, regardless of how you respond, or if it's been 21 days and you didn't respond, the person who submitted that now has the option to submit a complaint to OGEC. Sometimes they choose to, sometimes they don't, but they now have the ability to because they finished the grievance process. So again, after the 21 days are over or as soon as they receive the response, they can submit a complaint. They do have to include documentation that they satisfied the mandatory prerequisite of that grievance process. So that's going to be a copy of their grievance and either a copy of the public body's response or affirmation that they didn't receive a response. Again, why we have the public body copy us in, one, it's in the law, but two, it's also a good kind of safe because it is really easy in today's day and age to accidentally delete things, things go into spam. So if someone says, no, I never received a response, we can easily look in the email and say, oh yeah, you didn't, or no, actually, we got a copy, you did, right? But really what's really important here is that the grievance process is a mandatory prerequisite. So if they do not do that, the complaint will be dismissed because they did not follow the statute. We cannot go forward with the complaint without that grievance process being complete. If they're still within those original 30 days, they can go back and do the grievance process and come back and submit their complaint once that is done. But the grievance process is a mandatory prerequisite. So if they did the grievance process and their complaint is submitted, it'll move on to us. Obviously, we do not accept anonymous complaints. With public meetings law, there's a lot more with the grievance process, so it will be signed and have all the information from the grievance process. Then it'll move into preliminary review. What's unique with public meetings law compared to our other laws is that a case is opened on each member of the governing body, since it is the responsibility of individual governing body members. What we typically do is consolidate those cases so that our commission will hear from your governing body at once and then make individual determinations at the end of that phase. You can ask to be heard from separately, that is within your right, but the preliminary review phase is where the commission is determining, yes, there's enough evidence that a violation may have occurred, we need to investigate this further, or no, we're going to dismiss this. If it moves on to investigation, same thing, typically consolidated for the commission to hear from you at once, and then the commission makes individual determinations. The investigation phase is where they're making the final determination of yes, a violation occurred, or no, a violation did not occur. Only our governing body, the commission, can determine, if a violation has occurred, and then they'll also determine if what the sanctions for any violations will be. So now, before we talk about the sanctions, because that's what I'll get kind of into the enforcement too. I know we had that follow-up question from earlier. Are there any questions about that grievance and complaint process before we get to sanctions? And we have one polling question too. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so there's one question here. Your public body has received a public meetings law grievance. What is the public body required to do? We have A, the public body is not required to do anything. It is the governing body's responsibility. B, the public body needs to respond to the grievance within 21 days. Or C, the public body needs to respond to the grievance within 21 days and send a copy to OGEC. All right, yeah, those came in fast. Okay, yes, yeah, C. Need to respond within 21 days and send a copy to OGEC. Nice job. Okay, so if a violation, if the commission does find that a violation has occurred, there is the potential for a civil penalty up to $1,000 maximum. That is what is in the law. I will say though, our highest priority is education, and most often we do see the commission issue letters of education and required additional training for violations, especially first-time violations and those where we have found, training hasn't been done or, training has already started because they realized there was an issue, things like that. I will say, especially with public meetings law, and the question of it being individual governing body members' responsibility, but often staff is helping with things, and there's sometimes being confusion with that. The commission does take that into account. Having the commission hear the cases adds like that human element to it. You aren't just having a computer process your case and just saying, oh, definitely by the book, this was a violation. They hear more of that. So I will say, based on serial communications, because that was the question about how many violations or how many times we've seen that come up. Prohibited serial communications, we've had a few cases on. I will say, though, we actually haven't had as many. We are a complaint-based enforcement. So we only look at things if a complaint is submitted to us. And obviously, they have to do the grievance process and then the complaint on public meetings law. So that I think does lower some initial things. But for the most part, with prohibited serial communications, we haven't seen that many. I will say the grievance process having that 30-day time limit has likely limited some. But yeah, you are correct that there is some strictness there. And then others are also argue there's too much gray area there too. So we are kind of in this weird situation. There are some things in the legislative session right now that might impact. We are waiting to hear on that. But I will say that our highest priority is education. And so we do see those letters of education, and our commission really have that human element and listen to people and take into account when other things are impacting it. But the serial communications are one of our lower cases. I don't know, Ruth, if you want to add anything.
Yes, so I would just add that because we have that responsibility to keep the public informed, right? That when we're seeing material brought to our commission, we're strongly seeing it being about the notification. So meeting notices, recordings, and minutes, and all of those parts of keeping the public informed is a lot of what we see the public interest in as well.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Notifications are a big one. But yeah, but hopefully that answered. I know I kind of ramble because there is so much in this. So if there was another question or if I didn't answer your question entirely, please let me know. But I just want to say, yes, we are really focused on education. So you don't see a lot of huge penalties for public meetings law. There is a matrix that does take into account, willful negligence, things like that. And if you've made a lot of violations, those kind of things. But hopefully that gave a little more background into it at least. All right, perfect. Okay, So the only other thing to know about public meetings law is that separately from the grievance process or OGEC investigation, that a person affected by a decision of a governing body can file a suit in the circuit court. It does have to be filed within 60 days of the alleged violation becoming public record. And with suits filed under this statute, the court can void your governing body's decision. That's not a power we at OGEC have. That's only a power the circuit court holds. And if the court does determine there was intentional disregard or like willful misconduct by your governing body, the court may award a successful plaintiff attorney payment of fees by the governing body or its public body. But of course, before it ever gets to the complaint investigation sanction phase, we do just like to remind you to contact us if you have questions about public meetings law. If you have a meeting coming up that you're unsure of, give us a call, send us an email. If it's coming up within like the next week, I do recommend calling us just so we know it's high priority and we can get that answer to you sooner. But that is what we're here for. We are here to be your resource and make sure that you have the information you need to feel comfortable moving forward and complying with the law. We want to make sure, you have that information. So the last thing I'll talk about just really briefly is the training requirement. There is something in the statute that requires governing body members who are on governing bodies that have the authority to expend or assign 1 million in a fiscal year, take this training once per term. That is not with your governing body being an advisory body. This requirement does not extend to you, but we do just like to mention it in case you are in another governing body or, it's just something we like to mention. So, and then it's just good to have this training, even if you don't have that requirement, because you still have to comply with everything being a governing body member. So, but yeah, that is kind of the end of our training. We have covered resources, definitions, all the training requirements, meeting requirements, the grievance process, enforcement, and that training requirement. Were there any questions about public meetings law in general? We have a few more minutes and I'll give our contact information as well. But just wanted to see if there were any questions before we finish up.
A quick question. Thank you very much for this very helpful information. Can you provide any insight into conflicts of interest?
Yeah, definitely. So conflicts of interest are an ethics law provision. And I will say with ethics law, we're specifically looking at financial connections. So with a conflict of interest per ethics law, it would be you as a public official making a decision, taking an action, taking a vote, doing something within your position that could or would have a financial impact that could be a benefit or a detriment to yourself, your relative, your household member, or a business associated with yourself, your relative, or household member. So that could or would, if it would have a financial impact for certain, that's an actual conflict. If it could, it's an uncertain financial impact, then it's a potential conflict. And then, so that'll kind of change, but with ethics law, with conflicts, we're specifically looking for that financial impact. And then being on a governing body, you have to disclose your conflict in a public session saying, hey, I have this conflict of interest because of XYZ. With potential, once you make that public disclosure, you're able to continue acting on it. With actual conflicts, once you make that disclosure, you cannot take any further action. You can't vote, discuss, anything like that. So that was a very fast rundown of it. I will include, we do actually have a conflict of interest sheet, and we do have a webinar too if you're ever interested in it, but we do have a conflicts of interest sheet that I will include in the follow-up email too. So you can look at like the handout that gives a little bit more information on it. But that was a very fast rundown of it. So
great, thank you.
You're welcome. Awesome. Okay, well, I did put our information on the screen. So this is just our main phone number, email, and website, as well as our training email. And then I will be in contact with you, Katie, just to follow up. And just thank you so much for having us today. And I hope you have a great rest of your meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lex and Ruth, for joining us. This was a really helpful training.
Thank you.
Yeah, very helpful. I'll just say thank you again for both of you for being here and presenting to us.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Amazing, right on time. So it is right now 10 o'clock, and we will have, how's everybody feeling? 10, 15-minute break? Which one would you like?
Let's do 15 because I think Joy is joining us at 10:15 to give her presentation on tax programs.
Okay, how about a 14-minute break so we're all back here ready to go at 10:15?
Perfect. Enjoy your 14 minutes.
I like random. Okay, thanks. All right, welcome back, everybody. Looks like we are ready to go. So I'd like to welcome everybody back to our Friday, February 20th meeting of the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation. At this time, we are going to have a presentation from Joy Sears, a restoration specialist at SHPO. And she's going to be talking about preservation tax incentives in Oregon. Yes. Right. Joy, welcome.
Right, thank you very much, Chair Slaybaugh. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me and see my presentation? Okay, great. All right. Today we're going to talk about preservation tax incentives, which is one of my main jobs here at SHPO. So, and include a little case study.
Oh, I took your Amazon box out of the trash.
On computer. There we go. So the Oregon Casket Company building is on your agenda for today and is also taking advantage of both the special assessment and federal historic tax credit. This was built in 1870 or 1897. It was designed by Whidden and Lewis. It mostly been a warehouse over the years, but vacant in most recent times. And will soon be rehabilitated into 34 housing units with 2 live work units on the ground floor and 32 units on the upper floors. So now we're going to delve into the, you're going to review this later today, and I'm going to go through the tax incentives now. We're going to touch on Fed tax, but mostly concentrate on special assessment. So the federal historic tax credit, or the 20% tax credit, was implemented in 1976 by the federal government to offer income tax incentive for rehabilitating income-producing historic buildings that are listed on the National Register. This program is administered through the Oregon SHPO in cooperation and in conjunction with the National Register, the National Park Service in Washington, D.C., and the IRS, who handle the tax credit component. I am not a tax credit expert. I am a building expert. So it is a 20% federal tax for rehabilitating National Register historic buildings that are going to be income producing when they're done. It is not available for private owner-occupied residences. Or if an owner lives in the building and is trying to do the tax credit, that also doesn't work. Or at least it makes it more complicated. Any work on the interior or exterior of the building that structurally stays with the building qualifies for the tax credit. The IRS has explained it the best to me is think about the building as a dollhouse. If you shook it, turned it upside down and shook it, everything that fell out doesn't qualify for the tax credit. So no furnishings, no restaurant equipment, no appliances, and 4 screws does not 4 screws holding a cabinet into a wall does not qualify as a built-in. And I joke, but that it was actually a court case as part of this. And all work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation to be approved. And that means the entire project, not just individual components. So most of the time when we have historic properties that are going to do federal tax, they also do the special assessment program. So when the special assessment program first came on the books, it was called the Historic Property Tax Law of 1975. This is one of the nation's first and most successful incentives of its kind in terms of the value of the rehabilitation it leveraged. At the time it was created, it provided for a special assessment of properties listed on the National Register, operating as a 15-year freeze of the level of the property tax paid by the either the commercial or residential property owners investing in approved preservation projects. At the time it was created, there was also a 1-day open house in each calendar year requirement as part of the public benefit. There was very little requirements in that time, but you were to provide at least minimum maintenance standards. At the time it was created, it was scheduled to sunset in 10 years, and in the first year of operation, 21 properties entered the program in 1976. So fast forward. I won't read all of this, but I'll give you highlights. So a short history of special assessment as it became. When the original program was set to sunset, it suddenly got extended to 1993. In 1991, the Historic Assessment Review Committee was established as an appeal body. And keep that in mind, we'll be touching on that here later. In 1994, that was the first year without special assessment. It did not get renewed. I'm not sure what the circumstances was, but the program did come back in 1995. At that time, there were additional requirements that were installed, as such as creating a preservation plan for the property to be completed within the time frame of the program. And also instigated that second terms for special assessment could be applied for that would concentrate on seismic improvements, ADA accessibility, and energy conservation. So we fast forward to 2009, the renewal of the special assessment program, which was basically a reiteration of the 1995 program with a number of amendments that established that 10% spending threshold. The open house requirement got removed. The preservation plan got extended. That work should be completed within the time frame. Estimates were required in a time frame for completion, which would help with the reporting on the progress reports. The program also went from 15 years to 10 years. And then fast forward again, 2005 was the first year or second year without any special assessment until it was signed into law in May of last year. So changes to the new program. Some of this is being not anticipated or not shared by some folks. It is now just for commercial properties. Oh, darn it. Sorry. Okay. It is now just for commercial properties, no owner occupied properties, which has been Katie and I have had a number of conversations with folks about people unhappy about that. So unfortunately, that's what changes were, and that's where we'll go. The spending threshold categories are now exterior work, roof to foundation, especially what is visible from the public right-of-way, and structural work, which may or may not be visible. There's no longer discussion of first and second and final terms anymore. Now it is unlimited terms if the property qualifies and has enough work. The application fee has been raised back up to needing to spend 1/3 of 1% of the real market value of the property, and that's land and improvements together. The application cycle has been adjusted to now November 1st to March 1st of the year that the properties would go into effect. There's now in our rules have an opt-in, opt-out for local design review for CLGs, local government bodies. The Historic Assessment Review Committee has been replaced as the appeal body by a contested case hearing. And work completed before the before application does not count towards the program. Previous version allowed for work completed up to 24 months beforehand to be included, which was unfortunate because most of the time that work had already been reassessed by the county assessor's office. So it wasn't really a win for the program or the property owner. So what stays the same? It is still a 10-year program. We still require progress reports in years 3, 6, and 9, or until all work in the preservation plan is completed. Spending threshold still must be met by year 5, if not before. Amendments are still required for adding new projects, revising existing projects, and deleting existing projects from the preservation plan to make them official. We're still required to follow local land use and local ordinances. Owners are still required to keep their contact information up to date with our office, which is still an ongoing battle. And all work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation to be approved, just like the federal tax program. There are now only 110 properties remaining on the special assessment program's previous version. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because the Historic Assessment Review Committee, HARC, is still viable until 2034 when the last properties on the former version of the special assessment come off. So what is HARC? HARC is a 5-member committee made up of experts from the interests of the county assessors, the historic preservation community, a member of the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation, the development community, and local government. So HARC remains the appeal body for that 110 properties that are still under the former version of the program until its expiration. HARC meets annually in October for a business meeting and will meet in February and June if an appeal has been filed to be heard. Term of each member is 4 years, but a member serves at the pleasure of the governor. A member is eligible for reappointment, and a member whose term has expired continues to serve until their successor has been appointed normally. So you might wonder who's on the HARC committee right now. So right now we have from the development community, we have Matt Froman out of Portland, representing the preservation community. We have Kaiten von Gilderen, Portland, previously with Restore Oregon and now in a private firm. Representing county assessors, we have Carrie Savage, Baker County in Baker City, and is also on the Heritage Commission. Representing local government, we have Michael Boquist, planner of the city of La Grande. And representing the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation is Steve Mark, who is now terming off of the SACHP. And now that will leave a vacancy on the HARC that we need to fill with another member of the the State Advisory Commission. So I am here making a plea and a pitch for one of you to join my committee. Are there any questions? Did I pique anybody's interest?
Oh, silence. Come on, anybody want to step up?
Crickets.
Volunteer for another committee? Can't do it, Joy.
Okay.
Oh, Curry's volunteering. No, I'm just kidding.
It was like that last time.
How often do you meet?
Typically just once a year. It's been a while since we've had any appeals, but we can meet up to 3 times a year if needed. It's not a very strenuous committee appointment. We typically just meet the once a year and have a planning type business meeting and just recap the year, and talk about, just review things to be ready for when we do have an appeal.
Curry, did you have something to add?
Thanks, Chair Slaybaugh. I was just going to suggest that Joy share the information she just shared. So, also, it can be a little tricky when we have the joint meetings because that person can't be in two places at once, so they miss a little bit of the SACHP meeting, not all of it, for the HARC meeting. So just wanted to put that out there.
How much preparation time is there for the meeting?
If we have an appeal, it'd be a little bit, maybe at most a couple hours. Other than that, for the trainings or the business meeting, it's at most an hour because we normally send out materials beforehand.
Oh, Sarah looks like she might be interested. Matt?
Yeah, I'm interested. I will reach out to Joy to get a little bit more information, but yeah, I would potentially be interested in doing it.
No, great, Matt. Yeah, feel free to reach out when you have a time.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Well, last round for any questions. You all know how to get a hold of me otherwise.
Great. Thank you, Joy, for sharing the updates on that program. And it's a good one.
Okay, well, we're just opened up the we opened up the application cycle on November 1st, and is now countdown very madly to March 1st, and so far we only have one application, so it might be a very quiet year, but with a transition that was to be anticipated between that and plus the current economic environment. So we'll see how it goes.
Thank you again for coming and sharing that with us.
Not a problem. All right. You folks take care.
Great. Joy was so quick in her presentation. Katie, are we okay to start early, or we are waiting for applicants? And
we are still waiting for our preparer for the Oregon Casket Company building that Joy shared.
Okay. Well, then we get another 15-minute break, you guys. How about that? Unless there's anything we need to talk about. Curry?
Could I just have 2 minutes of that break to share about the Heritage Conference, which I forgot to mention yesterday?
Yes, please do.
That's okay. And all of you should have received an email about it. But the Oregon Heritage Conference is taking place in Woodburn. The city has been an awesome partner. It's going to be really cool to be there. They have an adorable downtown that's right on a railroad. And has lots of great food and businesses. So it is April 29th through May 2nd. Also, Woodburn will be having their Cinco de Mayo celebrations Friday through Saturday, and that is a place to do it if you're going to do those kind of celebrations for sure. We have 24 sessions, we have 10 tours, a bunch of demonstrations. The reception hosted by Woodburn is going to be, City of Woodburn is going to be in the historic City Hall building, which is an adaptive reuse project for housing. The Excellence Awards are going to be at Mount Angel, as is the keynote speaker. The keynote speaker is Monica Rhodes, who is a incredible leader in the preservation world. She's going to be really great. So it's lots of good stuff. As committee members, You get to attend the conference if you would like to. And it is treated the same as your travel and lodging for your role with SACHP, and we also cover the conference costs. So please take a look at the schedule, and if you're interested in attending, use that link that I sent you to register, because you will also be asked your lodging needs if you have them. And please do that by March 6th so we can make sure we have all of the lodging needs covered. And if you have questions, as I said in the email, feel free to reach out to me. But it's a super great conference and lots of awesome content. So thanks.
Thank you. Having gone to these before, I highly recommend them, and I hope as many people can attend as possible. And remember, if we're all gathered together and we're not talking about projects and deliberating or making decisions, we can hang out together, right? Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I had a quick question for Curry. I remember seeing the email, but I can't find it now. Do you remember when you sent it roughly? It was within the last 2 weeks, week?
It was yesterday.
Yesterday? Geez, I get a lot of emails apparently. I will go back and find it. Thank you.
If you don't find it, I can resend it. Just let me know.
Yeah, I'll find it. Thanks.
I'll include this information in my follow-up email from this meeting too, along with the OGEC materials that Lex was talking about. So we have everything in one place.
Wonderful. All right. Okay, well, we will take a break, a 10-minute break. Nope, it's 10:36, so it's an 8-minute break. You guys good? Enjoy, come back, and we will go over the National Register nominations. Thanks. All right, welcome back, everyone. Are we ready to proceed, Katie?
Yes, the preparer has joined us. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, we are ready to proceed for our Friday, the 20th meeting of the State Advisory Committee on Historic Preservation. We are at item number 5 on the agenda. And for the record, I'd like to note that Cassie Rippey is with us now. Thank you, Cassie. Welcome. All right. The National Register of Historic Places is the nation's official list of districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, and culture. The records are maintained in Washington, D.C. by the National Park Service under the authority of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Over 2,100 properties located in all 36 counties of Oregon are listed in the National Register. Oregon listings also include over 150 historic districts. In order to qualify for listing in the National Register, a property must possess and retain its historic appearance and be historically important at the local, state, or national level. A property's historic importance is determined through one of 4 criteria identified by the National Park Service. Those criteria are Criterion A, association with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. Criterion B, association with a preeminent individual. Criterion C, displaying distinctive characteristics of a type, period, method of construction, or work of a master. And Criterion D, potential to yield important information on prehistory or history. The review process is limited to consideration of these criteria and whether or not the document is technically complete and correct. When the committee determines that a nomination is eligible for listing, it recommends that the State Historic Preservation Officer sign the nomination and forward it to the keeper of the National Register in Washington, D.C. for review and listing. Nominations not meeting the criteria are either tabled to allow the applicant the opportunity to revise the nomination or not recommended for listing. At this time, I will turn it over to Katie for staff presentation on our first nomination, which is the Oregon Casket Company building in Portland.
Thank you, Chair Slaybaugh. Alrighty. The committee will now, if my PowerPoint works, will now review the proposed National Register of Historic Places nomination for the Oregon Casket Company building in Portland, which again, we just heard a little bit about from Joy. The Oregon Casket Company building is located on a corner lot in the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood north of downtown Portland, in an area characterized by low-rise, unreinforced masonry, early 20th century buildings interspersed with some larger, more modern development. The nominated boundary of the property is the tax lot boundary, which also corresponds to the building's footprint, and that's been the property's legal boundary since it was constructed in 1897. As Joy mentioned, the building was designed by Portland architects Whidden and Lewis, and it's a 5-story heavy timber building with a base shaft capital composition. Also, you might have heard it called a 3-part vertical block. The exterior features rough aggregate stucco cladding and red brick coins, and the original wood sash windows in the 2nd through 5th stories, and original loading doors at the ground level. At the interior, the building features exposed heavy timber posts and beams, brick perimeter walls, and wood floors, and the upper floors have open floor plates that reflect the building's original warehousing and light manufacturing uses. Since the end of the period of significance, the building's experienced a few alterations that the nomination outlined, including the addition of an enclosed staircase at the west end of the building, shown here, and the removal of an awning from the south facade, and the addition of a wood-framed mezzanine at the ground floor. The most significant alteration came in 1954 with the major remodel of the exterior ground floor including infill of those storefront transoms that you see on the left with stucco, application of square terracotta tiles beneath the transoms, and replacement of the remaining wood storefront windows with aluminum framed window systems on the east facade. As you can see from this photo, those windows are currently boarded. Additionally, as is pretty common for commercial buildings that have remained in use, the interior has been repeatedly remodeled for subsequent tenants. The building's original tenant for whom it was constructed was the Oregon Casket Company, which the nomination shares as the leading coffin manufacturer and wholesaler and distributor in the Pacific Northwest and supplied most Portland undertakers for decades. The company, the nomination says, maintained a low public profile, but even so, it was widely recognized by 1911 as an industry leader on the West Coast. The increasing workforce size is one of the things that reflected this success. And the company grew from 2 employees in the early 1890s and peaked around 90 employees in 1929. The nomination tells us that this building was constructed for the company in 1897 in that wave of economic recovery that followed the Depression of 1893. And the building's size and materials and the fact that it was designed by a pretty prominent Portland architecture firm all reflect the success of the company. From the time the building was finished until 1925, which is when the company vacated this building for a new, larger plant, the company used the building as its central warehouse, assembly space, showroom, and administrative hub for its regional wholesale operations. In 1919, the company began construction of that new plant I mentioned. That's actually the building in this photo, a little bit to the west. The second phase of that construction finished in 25, and by the next year, the building was occupied by a new tenant. The plant that was built in 1919, that was ultimately demolished in the early 70s, which leaves this as the only building that's associated with the Oregon Casket Company during its most productive and prominent period. Bringing it all together, the nomination argues that the Oregon Casket Company building is locally significant under criterion A in the area of commerce as the best remaining example of not only the Oregon Casket Company, but Portland's entire once significant undertaker supply and casket manufacturing sector. The period of significance runs from its construction in 1897 up until the company vacated the building in 1925. The nomination also tells us that the building retains sufficient integrity to convey its significance, despite those ground floor storefront and interior alterations, which did happen after the end of the period of significance in 1925. The nomination says that it retains integrity through character-defining features, including its distinctive base shaft capital composition, that kind of 3 obvious parts to the building, intact masonry and stucco cladding, original wood sash windows in the upper floors and the loading doors on the lower floor, the utilitarian interior, and that surrounding commercial context, which remains intact. Some questions that you might consider in today's discussion are, does the nomination make the case for significance under criterion A in the area of commerce? Does it make the case for local significance? Is that the appropriate level? And does the building retain sufficient integrity to communicate its significance under criterion A? I want to note that this property is located within a CLG, the City of Portland, and we did receive their Historic Landmarks Commission's recommendation and comments on the nomination. They were in support of it. They had a few additional comments and revisions to consider, and we shared those with the SACHP ahead of the meeting. We have not received any other public comments on this nomination at this time. And at this point, I will stop sharing my screen. Does the committee have any questions for me or other SHPO staff on this nomination before we welcome testimony from the preparer who's joining us today? Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and promote our preparer, Eric Hovmiller, as a panelist, and hand it back to you, Heidi.
Thank you. Okay, before we let Eric present, are there any conflicts of interest of any committee members to declare? Okay, hearing none. We will continue on to public testimony. So Eric, if you will introduce yourself and note your address and your association with this project for the record, and then feel free to share what you'd like to share about the nomination.
Great, thanks Heidi. My name is Eric Hofmiller. I work for Continuum Preservation Consulting in Portland. Address for the record is 3135 Northeast 23rd Avenue in Portland. The zip is 97212. Yeah, great introduction, Caitlin. That was really well done. I just have a few comments just to share my perspective. The building's been of great interest to preservationists for decades. Really multiple developers since the first years of the 2000s have tried to make the economics of preserving and renovating the building work, but it didn't happen. And now it's getting financial assistance from the redevelopment agency in Portland to turn it into workforce housing. It will also include a cafe and a couple of live work kind of artist spaces, it's hoped. And despite the interest and hope for the building, the significance was actually kind of elusive. People would sometimes invoke its like pre-1900 construction date as being significant enough, or they would just say, "Oh, Whidden and Lewis, great! It's significant just because of that." And then I think other people are probably intrigued by the idea of like mystery of death and caskets and all that. But really, the digitization of records made it possible to really understand the scope of what Oregon Casket Company was as a real powerhouse in the Pacific Northwest and beyond for undertaker supply products, chiefly caskets, of course. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. Thanks for your review, and I'm happy to answer any question any of you may have throughout your conversation here.
Great, thank you, Eric. Are there any questions of the preparer of the nomination? Okay. Moving along, are there any other representatives on behalf of the application wish to speak?
No, thank you, Chair Slaybaugh.
Okay. Well, that is great news then. We will move on to our preparer, our lead reviewer. Cassie, if you want to kick things off for us, be great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to keep this a little bit brief just because I'm having some laryngitis issues today. But first I want to say, I appreciate your submission. I think the nomination was very well written. I think that the case for the period of significance and the significance under criterion A was very well developed. I think one of the areas that I had thought could have been a little bit strengthened is a clarification in just the operating of the Oregon Casket Company. There were a few places where the nomination mentioned that the Oregon Casket Company employed a number of undertakers, but it wasn't clear that I think in leading up to that the Oregon Casket Company was also in the business of doing that kind of work in addition to the commerce of selling and distributing funerary materials. But I think I think that's kind of a small ancillary piece. I think the nomination was very clear. I had a few technical edits, just small spelling typo things. I think there was a notation on page 3 where there's a mention of the Minnesota Hotel as a contributing element, but it doesn't say what it's a contributing element to. So I think that's a spot where it can be clarified. It's presumably to a district in the area. And there was a figure, and I did not write it down in my notes. There's a figure that I think was referenced to the awning that Katie mentioned that was removed, and I couldn't see the awning in the picture, so I don't know that that's the best representation of that point, although I don't know that there's a better photograph to supplement. So I think that was one that I had just called out as something that could be a little bit better improved. The argument for integrity, I think, is pretty well laid out. I do have a question I would like to hear from some of our other committee members about their thoughts around the kind of substantial changes that were made around the first floor to the exterior component. But I do think that there is sufficient integrity for the rest of the building, interior and exterior, to support the argument. I think you did a really great job in putting this nomination together, and I appreciate you taking the time to come with us today. For that, I think I'm going to open it up to anybody else that might like to share.
Thank you, Cassie. I think you did a great job enunciating and talking with laryngitis going on. So, Steve, would you like to share any comments?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the Section 8. As far as the historical stuff goes, excellent nomination. I just had I know sometimes these things and the nominations don't necessarily ask you to do this, but I enjoyed how this company, it's a great illustration of how materials and transport affect its position in the marketplace, and also the efficiencies. And I a lot of the stuff was implied, but it seemed that the assembly plant component was basically because it was cheaper to send the raw materials to Portland and then build the caskets from there. But then once transportation improved, that component dropped out, because then suddenly you can have a big plant and dominate the industry through scale. So those two parts I thought were really came through in Section 8. The only other comment I have was he'd probably class it as a Stephen Dale Beckham comment, in that the Finley lineage also includes William L. Finley, who operated a rather large Sunset out on Highway 26 cemetery, and became a great conservationist, especially with wildlife refuges in the state. And the Finley Refuge near Corvallis is named for him. So beyond that, I have to give you great marks throughout.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Anyone else in the committee have? Yes, Sarah.
I thought it was a really interesting and very good nomination. I really enjoyed reading it. Also, I had kind of a question, and that was in response to the letter that came from the Landmarks Commission, where they were recommending a little bit more expansion of the Chinatown, being an adjacent cultural area. And I was thinking that particular letter didn't mention, although your nomination did mention the Japantown, which preceded the Chinatown. And I guess that I felt if you did in fact respond to that Landmarks Commission on the adjacent and maybe overlapping Chinatown, that you wouldn't want to leave the Japantown out, was really my thought. That was really the only thing. I really enjoyed reading about the Finley connection too, and I was sorry that he left and wasn't involved for a longer time with the company myself. But because that family's been around for a long time, and anyway, so those are really my only two thoughts. I was interested in to how they kept the company kept such a low profile because they didn't want to appear to be profiting from death, which I thought was a sentiment that probably isn't so common anymore as it was then. Anyway, that's all.
Very true. Thank you, Sarah. So next, we'll go to Jackie.
Well, I also really enjoyed reading Section 8 and learning so much about the history of the casket company and its impact all through the Northwest and West Coast. But I did also want to go back to those suggestions by the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission, and to consider including some of the information that they referenced about describing that neighborhood at the time period being that transition between Chinatown and the industrial area, and how it related at that time as a place to during that time of development. So, and they had a pretty good outline about their thoughts about how to include those. So, which I thought was worth doing. And then the only other little thing I was wondering is about the railroad spur on Flanders. And at some point, did it get removed? Because, so that's kind of interesting, that whole railroad connection. And then now it's kind of shifted. So, other than that, great information. And oh, so my other question was, did they ever put out a catalog of all their supplies like some companies would have? That would be an interesting interesting thing to find if such a thing existed.
Thank you, Jackie. Eric, you're welcome to chime in to the conversation if you want to respond to anybody. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going down the list for comments. Up to you. Okay.
I guess if there's no one else on the commission that wants to chime in, then I can answer the questions, but I figured I'll just wait until everyone's done with their comments and then I can answer.
Perfect. All right, we'll go to Greg.
Yes, I want to echo my colleagues' comments here on the thoroughness and the content of the nomination. It was a pleasure to read through. I wanted to pay particular note to the introduction section of the narrative. I found that especially valuable. It's how it kind of lays out how the narrative is structured, what it tells us, what it's going to tell us. I found that very helpful, and came back and referred to that after reading it. So on a reader's end, I found that edition very helpful. I wanted to note that. To Cassie's question about integrity, as far as we have one of those best practice documents that we have is on integrity, and it emphasizes that the integrity is not the condition. And so I think that despite the long-term vacancy that the buildings had, and there has been some deterioration, the property, the nomination shows that the property remains a good representative of its historic contributions, and I think would still be recognizable by the people that are associated with the Oregon Casket Company during those peak years of significance. Thank you. Enjoyed reading this one.
Thank you, Craig. We'll go to Matt.
Yeah, thanks. Pretty much feel the same way as everybody else on the committee. Very well done. Couple of comments that I had specifically, kind of the same lines as Cassie and Greg regarding the integrity. I don't think the alterations to the first floor hurt integrity too much. Obviously, I think the people that built it and used it during its period of significance would obviously recognize it. The one thing that I do wonder about, and this is sort of outside of the whole nomination process, but if interior features are considered character defining features, um, during the restoration and conversion into residential units, is that potentially going to impact the integrity? And if so, could restoration and repair to the first floor back to a more original look be minimization or mitigation for the impacts to the interior features? So that's just something to think about for, I guess, long-term planning. But that's really all I had. Other than that, very well done. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. From my opinion, as far as the alterations to the first floor, I think the fact that they haven't encased the first floor, as we've seen in many buildings that get modernized over the time, all of the fenestration openings are still there. It's just the windows and doors have been boarded up, covered, or changed, but the opening pattern is still there, which easily allows it to be restored. So yes, it deters from its integrity at this point, but because those openings are still defined, I don't think it's a matter of losing all design integrity of the first floor. I still think it holds it. Like Matt and others were saying. Uh-oh, do I have to stop talking? Katie, you're muted.
Muted, Katie.
Okay, it's back on. So I was just saying that I find that the integrity is lost a little bit, but basically, from my perspective, if you still look at the building and you can still see it's the same building, then it still holds a lot of integrity there. Plus, knowing that hopefully those openings will be restored, meeting Secretary of Interior standards, that they're going to be very similar to the originals. So I think that's a great move in that direction. And as far as the interior changes, that's always a hard one because so many of these commercial buildings go through years and years of reuse, and holding on to interior integrity is a really challenging thing for any adaptive reuse building or any old building. I ran into that in my own projects, and it's a really hard one. It seems like if you're getting on the special assessment program, they really look at the interior, but we know that many of the older buildings have lost most of their interior integrity. I know, the one we looked at yesterday, even the Carnegie Library, it was painted over, but all it still held all of its historic integrity. Commercial buildings like this, they're stripped of everything with tenant to tenant. So that's always a challenge to feel if we're meeting integrity, although I don't ever find that interior integrity comes up that much as far as one of our listings. And I think that's it for me. Echoing other committee members that, addressing the comments from the Portland CLG. And I would also, as Jackie said, love to know if there was a catalog. I'm still blown away that they made caskets on a multiple story building and not just, you think assembly lines flat. So that's just impressive without huge elevators or anything like that, moving materials up and down. Are there any other committee members who wish to share any comments before we let Eric share any responses? Okay, Eric, let you chime in on any of the comments that our committee members have made. You
Yeah.
don't have to address them either.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I think the biggest one is obviously the integrity. I wish I had a photo or a rendering of what the architecture firm is planning to do with the storefronts. But yeah, it is very much a return to what was there before 1954. Obviously, some of the materials are going to be different, but as far as the openings and the windows and multi-light doors and windows and stuff, that will be returned on that eastern the main primary facade. Yeah, it's possible it's out there on the internet. I did a quick search. I couldn't find it, so it's somewhere around there. Maybe it hasn't been put out to the public yet, though. I'm just going to go through some of the questions that were raised. Cassie, you went first, and yeah, I didn't quite understand the undertaker relationship to the company because the company was not in the business of operating a funeral home, but yet we did see them. There's a couple of instances where we are shown that they have some undertakers, but I didn't know if it was just one. I didn't know if it was possibly Tuthill, the sort of the president of the company, because that very well might have been him and just him. So other than that, I didn't really see anything else that would indicate that they did any other types of funerary arrangements whatsoever. Cassie, you also talked about the awning figure, that it doesn't really show the awning. And yeah, we debated about putting that in because it's really hard to show or hard to tell it's there. It is there, but it's really quite minimal. So maybe I'll just note that you can barely see it, or you can only see it if it's blown up a lot. Let's see, Steve, you talked about Findlay, and I did not actually get into researching the line. And now you say it, I'm just like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. All those other places with William L. Findlay. So thanks for that. Sarah, you mentioned really what was my oversight in maybe not including Chinatown with, or including Japantown with Chinatown. So that was just kind of a lazy mistake there. I will put that in there. Jackie, you brought up questions about the rail line on Flanders Street. To be sure, I don't know, but it was just a spur line, meaning it connected with the main line on 4th Avenue, which is a block away. So I think it was really just meant to sort of connect, maybe just Oregon Casket Company business or maybe a few other company that had warehouses around there as well. So it's just a small little spur to connect with the main line, but it's certainly not there now. Possibly it's buried underneath some asphalt as happens. You also asked about the catalog, and then other people echoed that. I did not find a catalog. I dug pretty deep on this, as I do with all my nominations, obsessively at times. The closest thing I came to finding something like a catalog was actually an invoice that someone has preserved and has for sale. You can purchase the invoice if you so choose on a website for some company in probably a funeral home somewhere in Eastern Oregon, if I remember right. And it just kind of listed all the things that they were ordering. But yeah, other than that, the company would sort of somewhat share at times, like, oh, we sell these things and these things, but I never saw a catalog. Interestingly, they also toyed, or they actually did try selling windmills for a while. I believe they were metal constructed windmills. So that was just a random thing that they were doing, I think, early in the history, kind of, if I remember right, like around the turn of the century. Um, yeah, and then, Matt, you specifically talked about the interior renovations and how that's going to affect any character defining features in the interior. Um, and yeah, to be sure, and Heidi was kind of talking about this, that like there's kind of no way to sort of save and preserve a building with a reuse of its purpose without impacting it significantly. I guess I would say the amount of character defining features on the interior are pretty minimal, um, other than sort of just the exposed, floors and beams and the brick walls. The brick walls, from what I know, will be maintained. They won't be covered up with, plaster or drywall or anything. Um, I think everything else will kind of be, yeah, turned into, modern housing. Um, So I think that's all I got to say, unless you got more questions, of course.
That's great, Eric. Thank you. And just to confirm, Katie, are there any other opponents or proponents?
No, we have no one else registered to speak on this one. Thanks.
All right. Well, then we can turn it back over to Cassie if you feel like making a nomination or leading any further discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to move to approve the State Historic Preservation Office submitting this nomination to the keeper with a few of the edits mentioned by the committee, including updates to regarding Japantown, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten what the others are, but the edits made by the committee, and yeah, I think that covers it.
We get a second.
Second.
Okay. Friendly amendment could be to help Cassie with those missing things, which would be, as you said, including the comments from Portland CLG, the Chinatown relationship, and then in addressing maybe a little bit more about the awning, or at least identifying it clearer in the picture, and the integrity of the inside, which is fine to note, basically, Eric, what you just noted in our discussion, and then the outside integrity, and how, I don't know if it's appropriate, Katie, but to address that the owner is looking at restoring some of the fenestration on the first floor. So Katie can work with you on that. So those are my friendly amendments to the motion.
Thanks. Second.
Okay. We'll do a roll call vote. Jackie?
Yes.
And Matt?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Cassie? She's shaking, yes.
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 Couldn't find the mute button.
Greg?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Great. Thank you so much for preparing this wonderful nomination, and really excited to see how this building gets transformed. Please keep us in touch with that, because I think all of us are really interested in seeing the renovation of it and the reuse into the housing project.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for the insights you provided. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next one, or do we need a couple of minutes to wait for preparers to?
Nope, everyone who's registered for this nomination is present.
Okay.
Thanks, Joseph.
All right. Okay. Well, here we go again. Were they here to listen to the National Register opening statement?
Yes.
They were. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and when we meet in person, we don't typically read it before every nomination, just at the beginning. So I think we're okay.
Okay. It just depends on if they were here or not. Thank you. Okay, then we will move into the next nomination review of the Ursula K. Le Guin House, if I pronounced that correctly. I'll let Katie confirm the pronunciation and give us a brief presentation on this nomination.
You got it. Thanks, Chair Slaybaugh. Screen set up. As Chair Slaybaugh said, the committee will now review the proposed National Register nomination for the Ursula K. Le Guin House, also in Portland. The Le Guin House is located on Northwest Thurman Street, actually very near the Balch Gulch Bridge, which we reviewed last June. So we're kind of back in the same neighborhood, which is the largely residential neighborhood of Willamette Heights in Northwest Portland. It's surrounded by mostly contemporary early 20th century residential development, similar in size and style. The house was built around 1908 and has characteristics of the Queen Anne and shingle styles, which are characterized by woodlap and shingle siding, like you can see on this front-facing gable here, a steeply pitched roof with deep overhanging eaves and bay windows. The building is 2.5 stories tall with a daylight basement, and an especially distinctive feature is this covered wraparound porch on the rear facade. There have been a couple of exterior alterations since the house's construction, including the addition of a 1-story attached garage on the east facade that you can see there, the deck on top, probably around 1920, before the Le Guins lived in the house, and a small 1984 laundry room addition on the other side of the house, as well as the addition of these windows, we'll talk about a little bit more later, in Ursula K. Le Guin's writing studio. At the interior, the ground floor includes an entryway, kitchen, dining room, and living room, which feature wood flooring and trim, built-in shelving, built-in benches, and this fireplace here. The second floor includes bedrooms and Le Guin's writing studio in a room that the family initially used as a nursery, and that was outfitted with these multi-light casement windows overlooking Mount St. Helens, built-in shelving, and a built-in desk that the nomination notes was custom fitted to her typewriter. The attic includes a small finished room that served as Le Guin's first writing studio while this room was still being used as a nursery. And the basement, like I mentioned earlier, was converted into a 1-bedroom apartment in 1986. These interior features are especially important because, like we talked about yesterday, the nomination is arguing significance under criterion B, which is the National Register criterion for properties with a significant association to a person significant in our past. In this case, that's the influential, critically acclaimed, and widely read American author Ursula K. Le Guin. Le Guin was a prolific, critically acclaimed, widely read author who published dozens of novels, volumes of poetry, critical essays, translations, and children's books. And she was most well known for her work in fantasy and science fiction, particularly as part of the New Wave movement, which the nomination tells us redefined the science fiction genre through experimentation with psychology, social critique, and literary structure. Le Guin was one of the first female writers in the science fiction and fantasy genres to achieve critical and mainstream visibility on an international level. And her works won multiple major awards, including 5 Nebula Awards, 5 Hugo Awards, and the National Book Award. Her work is widely considered boundary breaking in its exploration of social, political, philosophical, gender-related, and feminist themes, and it has been widely acknowledged as influential by many other authors working in or adjacent to this genre, including other celebrated female writers like Margaret Atwood, Octavia Butler, and Zadie Smith. With regard to this particular place, 3321 Northwest Thurman Street, all of Ursula K. Le Guin's major works, including her most well-known and critically acclaimed, like A Wizard of Earthsea, The Left Hand of Darkness, and The Dispossessed, were written while she was living in this house. The nomination specifically identifies areas of the house and property that are associated or reflective of her creative work, including the attic room that was her first writing space and that still includes a built-in desk, her second floor writing studio, which is the most directly associated space with that custom shelving and desk and those casement windows with views of the mountains, and the Le Guin's gardens, which were planted and maintained by Charles Le Guin, and that the nomination notes reflect the imagery and environmental awareness that characterize her work. The gardens also include a redwood tree planted by the Le Guins in the 60s that's a tie to her roots in Berkeley and the Napa Valley, which were also influential in shaping the direction and themes of her work. In summary, the nomination argues that the house at 3321 Northwest Thurman Street is nationally significant under criterion B in the areas of literature and women's history for its association with the life and creative work of Ursula K. Le Guin. one of the most influential science fiction and fantasy authors of the 20th and early 21st centuries, and one of the most influential female literary figures of the period. To quote the nomination, Le Guin's work challenged genre boundaries, addressed complex questions of gender, freedom, power, and identity, and left an enduring mark on American literary history. The period of significance identified in the nomination begins in 1960 with the Le Guin's purchase of the property and her early years of writing in the house, and it carries through to 1974 when The Dispossessed was published. The nomination argues that this period encompasses her emergence and maturation as a writer and her most active engagement with the New Wave movement in science fiction. And it tells us that by 1974, she had secured her lasting impact on modern literature, and that the house, by extension, had attained the association that conveys its significance under criterion B. The nomination also argues that the property retains sufficient integrity to convey this association through the retention of character-defining features related to Le Guin's work and period of occupancy, including her writing studio with that built-in desk and shelving and windows, and other interior and exterior spaces. Some questions you might consider in today's discussion include, does the nomination make the case for Ursula K. Le Guin's significance within a national context? Does the nomination make the case for significance under criterion B in the areas of both literature and women's history? Does the building retain sufficient integrity to communicate its significant association with Le Guin, and does it identify the character-defining features associated with her literary significance? And does the period of significance reflect the period of time when the property was, it's quote here, associated with important events, activities, or persons, or attain the characteristics which qualify it for National Register listing, which is the definition for period of significance given in National Register Bulletin 16A, how to complete the National Register registration form. This property, just like the Casket Company building, is located within the City of Portland, a certified local government, and we received their Historic Landmarks Commission's recommendation and comments on this nomination, and those were shared with the SACHP ahead of this meeting. The HLC support the nomination, and they had a few suggestions for revisions, including adding some more information about how the Le Guins used the basement, about the writing studio conversion, and expanding on Le Guin's role in discussions on gender and sexuality in literature. We also received, just in the last couple of weeks, 2 letters of support, one from an individual member of the public and one from a group called the Concerned Citizens, and both of these were also shared with the SACHP ahead of this meeting. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before I promote our preparer to panelists, are there any questions for staff on this nomination? You can also ask me these later during discussion. Okay, I'm going to promote our preparer to panelists.
As you're doing that, I will ask if there are any conflicts of interest of any of our committee members to declare. Hearing none, seeing no head shaking, that is great. We will then move on to, it's like, who do we have here? Do you have an order in particular, Katie, of who wants to present?
Yeah, I think we'll have the presenter, Nika Faulkner, present first.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, if you'll just state your name, address, and your relationship to the application.
Absolutely. My name is Nika Faulkner. I'm with Heritage Consulting Group, located at 15 West Highland Avenue in Philadelphia, PA, zip 19118. Just as I might have too much to say about this one, but working on this document has been very meaningful to me, both professionally and personally. I've been a fan of Ursula since I was young, but researching her writing for historic preservation purposes really was special. She's inspiring not only as a writer, but as a thinker, teacher, and an activist. So as was stated, Le Guin lived and worked here for decades, and it's clear how profoundly place shaped her creative life. The multiple writing spaces, along with her immense collection of books and art, to me, really reflect the intellectual curiosity of Ursula and her family. And I was also fortunate enough to meet her children during this process, including Theo Le Guin, who I believe has joined us today. Their generosity in sharing their childhood home and memories and an array of historic family photographs was really invaluable to the process. And there was one particular moment from my local research that stands out in my mind. I visited the Willamette Heights Library, and the librarian I spoke with lit up at the mention of Le Guin and shared how everyone kind of knew that she frequently visited the library, and that kind of coincides with her book of poetry, Blue Moon on Thurman Street, which describes her greater experience of living in this neighborhood. So that experience for me at the library was kind of a vivid reminder that her presence here was lived and it was local and deeply felt. It's really apparent to me that she was connected to both the community and a greater human purpose in a really intimate way. So after completing this draft nomination, I actually picked up a copy of A Wizard of Earthsea for the first time. And while I read, imagined her working on the series here while raising her family. And there was one line when she's describing the Isle of Gaunt, or the island of Gaunt, which is the protagonist's childhood home. And she describes it as a single mountain rising a mile above a storm-racked sea. And that image immediately conjured the view from the back deck of her home on Thurman Street. So looking north to Mount St. Helens, which really does kind of look like an island above the sea of fog and forest. So I can see how this place really influenced her. So thank you all for your time in reviewing the nomination. I hope you found it as interesting and exciting as I did writing it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have as they come up.
Cool. Thank you, Nika. Are there any other preparers or representatives who would like to say anything about the nomination?
Thanks, Chair Slaybaugh. We do have a couple people on the line, but none have registered to speak. Could we take a moment, and if anyone online would like to provide comment, could you raise your Zoom hand, please? Okay. Oh. Okay. Theo Downs Le Guin has raised his Zoom hand. I'm going to promote him to panelist.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
Thanks for your time today. I'm Theo Downs Le Guin. I'm one of Ursula's 3 kids and her literary executor and president of the Family Foundation. I wasn't actually planning to give any testimony today, but it was thrilling to hear Nika's review of the application. And I just wanted to say, as a family, how happy we are at this process. And I think that the nomination will complement the future life of the house, which I'm not sure, Katie, if we're going to be speaking to that later, but the plan is for the house to become a writer's residency managed by a local nonprofit. And I think that the status of the house with a historic designation will complement that that future chapter that we are in the process of planning and preparing for now. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that might be appropriate from the family perspective, if that's useful.
That's wonderful, Theo. Thank you. That's really exciting about the future of the home too. I'm sure it is for your family as well. Well, we can turn it over to Steve to kick off our deliberation, and then if we have questions, we can ask them of Nika or Theo as they're both here.
All right. I know we have, it looks about 20 minutes theoretically. And so I'm going to, this of course, being a national bee is one of the, it's one of those that you you want to take some time with, partly because of the bar, and which is high. And I think overall I think we have a winner here. There are some questions though, and whenever you delve into an author's life that's this complex, it does raise a few questions, both from the technical aspect, but also from the literary one. And you have somebody, and I can follow the strategy for how she's presented in the nomination, but there will be these questions, and you have a writer that's into not only science fiction or slash fantasy, but you also have poetry. There are libraries around the state where if you were to find the one book they have that she wrote, it would be children's literature. So it's not, it's kind of one of those, I think of it as sort of the round peg into the square hole. It can fit maybe, but it's not what it's not like our last nomination where you can just say, all right, by economics and there's a straight line where it's not a straight line. I don't think. Be that as it may, I still think it meets the criteria, and from an integrity standpoint, it has the advantage of most of the changes she directed. So, if not all of them, so it's from that aspect, it's good. Sci-fi has a problem in that most fiction, and this is just me thinking about it and my interests, is that it's often judged by how real it is. Sci-fi generally doesn't have that advantage because you're projecting into the future or some place far away from this island home we have called Earth. So so there's some interesting complexities here, but I won't belabor them because most of my comments could be read. I revised my cover sheet, which that's a first for me in the 8 years I've been on the committee. And mostly, I don't think there's anything that could be hostile here, but there are some interesting questions within the nomination that you raised. And her parents are an interesting pair. And you have a situation where I think her mother actually sold more books than her father did. Even though he was quite well known if you're an anthropologist or an archaeologist. So beyond that, I'm going to turn it over to the other committee members because partly because of time, but also we'll have a chance to address this as others may want to comment.
Thank you, Steve. Cassie.
Yeah, thanks. I will lose my space here at noon, so I wanted to jump in. First, I promised Katie that I wouldn't turn this into a book club. I am very much a fan, Mika. When you were expressing how much this meant to you, I was really excited to see this nomination come up. And honestly, my first reaction was, wait, this isn't already done? Like, come on. So yes, I think in my mind, in reading the nomination, I think that there's no question that this meets the criteria for national significance under the criteria. I do have one point. I think there's a few formatting kind of technical things that I'll just share with Katie via email. I think like typographical type of updates, just very couple of small. One thing I think just want to ask you to consider is could the areas of significance include gender or LGBTQ as part of the nomination, since that was significant theme amongst her writings. And I want to say I really, really appreciate how clearly your figures and photos were called out in the nomination and how well they described everything that you were calling them out for. There's one figure where it calls out the addition of the laundry room. I think you could also call out the deck that was added later, I think, just to kind of make clear which those additions were. My understanding was the other writing space that was added or updated was not visible from a layout perspective, as I understand the writing. So, but just calling out those additions so that it's clear what you're talking about. Yeah, I really enjoyed reading your nomination and brought it back to all of those things that I really enjoy about Le Guin as an author and as an explorer of the human experience. And so I just really appreciate you putting this nomination forward, and Theo, for you sharing your family with us through this nomination.
Thanks, Cassie. Sarah.
I agree with the previous comments. And I guess I had a couple of things I wanted to mention, and that is that I feel that Ursula Le Guin was significant in such a variety of writing areas that I hate for any one of them to take a lot of precedence over the others. And I think that's already been mentioned, like with the children's books, as well as sci-fi, poetry, and gender. I feel like they need equal focus in my mind, anyway. I just want to make sure that you feel like that in the nomination that you've been able to give equal focus to those. I don't feel that there's a conflict with national significance. That didn't, because I mean, she's clearly a nationally recognized and celebrated author, and I don't feel like that was an issue. I did have one issue that is probably, I mentioned it already, and that is, and maybe this is necessary because of the way that the rules are written on doing the National Register applications, but I feel that to put the close of the significance at 1979 seems extremely arbitrary to me. And I feel that she lived in the house until the day of her death, and that a lot of her recognition came after 1979. She did a great deal of work after 1979, and I feel that it's I don't know, it just bothered me a lot to end the significance at that date. And I'm hoping that there might be some way to broaden that. The last thing is that I wanted to mention, I really was taken with the redwood tree, and I liked it being called out in the nomination. Also thought, oh, maybe this is a possibility for an historic tree designation, and just wanted to suggest that. That was all.
If I could speak to a couple of, oh, I'm sorry if someone else had their hand raised.
Yeah, let's go through the rest of our committee and then we'll let you respond. Thank you, Nika. Jackie.
Yeah, I really also really enjoyed reading this nomination, and I really appreciated the thorough overview and discussion of the whole genre of her work, which I have to admit I was not completely familiar with, and now it has inspired me to delve more into a lot of her earlier science fiction. And for many years, I have cut out a little poem that was published in the in the Oregonian at one point that she had written. And I had put it on my refrigerator. And sometimes I read that, just because gave me a good feeling. So I always remember that too. I had a couple of really minor things, and one of them was in figure 6, where in the floor plan, her writing studio is labeled the office, and I think it would just really, associate more with her if that was labeled the writing studio. And also, there is mention that there was a built-in desk still in the attic, and I don't think there is a picture of the attic with that desk in it, which might be useful to include as well. But other than that, great nomination, a lot of great information.
Thank you, Jackie. Let's go to Greg.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think it's a great nomination packet. I will say when I first started reviewing it, I was a bit disappointed on page 1. It has the applicable criteria C mentioned, and I was like, oh my gosh, why would this be under C? She's nationally significant. But then I read through, and it is in fact B. So that might be a one thing we'll want to fix. So someone with the National Park Service doesn't have the similar reaction. I think it's a very, very strong nomination. I did have the same question, a minor question, Sarah's point about the period of significance in 1979. But I think Nika is already going to address that. A couple small little typo things that I'll send to Katie, but they're very minor and don't affect my support for the nomination. But I also wanted to call out again. I guess it's like with the last one as well, that the statement of significance summary paragraph. I think this one is particularly strong. It very clearly identifies the criteria, the areas, and the period of significance as it's required by the standards. So I just want to call that out and just acknowledge that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. We'll go to Matt.
Thanks, Heidi. So my introduction to Ursula Gwynn was not through her writings at first, but I saw the 1980 production of Lathe of Heaven on PBS, and it blew my 5-year-old little mind. My parents might not have wanted me to watch that, but I did anyways, and I have since read it and thoroughly enjoy it. So yeah, it's great to see this local connection. I think it's very well written. Agree with Greg on the statement of significance. I do feel a little bit differently than Sarah and Greg on the period of significance. I think back to the overview that Katie gave yesterday and looking at the examples of Jim Pepper and really defining the period of significance of what defined that person as making them significant. And I think this nomination does a really good job of defining that period of, where did it go? 1960 to 1974. And while she was a very prolific writer and very successful, it's this time period that really defined her style, defined her work, and brought her to the prominence. And that's what I took away from the talk that Katie gave yesterday. And that's how I understand you would want to define period of significance for B. So I think it was pretty well done and justified for that. The other comment I have is do a double check on your lat long. I think there is an extra 0 in your latitude decimal, and it actually plots it somewhere down a little bit further south. So that's very minor, but I don't know how I just happened to stumble across it, but double check that. So thank you again for an excellent nomination. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Let's go to Anne.
I don't have a lot of comments because I think everyone has mostly said it. Nika, your passion says a lot. Legacy. And Theo, the smile on your face and the pride that you take there, I can feel that too. I love the part where she talks to this other writer and it says I got a little bossy and told him that the women in his novels are kind of predictable. And he didn't have to pay attention, but he did. And just, all those thoughts about that, because writing is so powerful, right? Words are so powerful. And I think, Theo, that you said that eventually this is going to become a writers in residence handled by a nonprofit. And knowing how important place is, and being a writer myself, thinking how some people will feel such the gift of that, being able to go in there. And yeah, I appreciate what Sarah said too about how long. I know there's technical things we have to look at, but place carries energy that's still going to be there. So anyway, this is exciting, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Anne. I think the only other comments I have to add, besides what everybody else did, Matt or Greg, I can't remember which one of you found the miss on the first page. I was like, oh, C. Wait, no, it's B. Yeah, Greg. But my only other question is, Nika, from Philadelphia, how did you get involved in this National Register nomination?
The nonprofit that will be taking over for the residency hired my firm. That just happened. We're a national firm, but we just happened to be in Philadelphia, and my firm didn't even know I was a fan. So it's all happenstance. I think that we had worked with Literary Arts on another project, so it really was just clandestine. Yeah,
that is great. And then Theo, I just want to ask: are you sitting in the house right now?
I am. I'm in the living room.
I thought you were. I love it. Perfect.
Putting books on shelves.
Nika, if you want to follow up on anything at this point, I welcome you to do that.
Sure. I wanted to speak a little bit more on the new wave movement in science fiction in response. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting Steve's remarks on that. And I want to just emphasize that this was, realness. And I think the science part of science fiction defines the era of the early era of science fiction before the new wave movement. And I think Ursula was interacting with science fiction at a point when genres were colliding. And so I think science fiction provided that space for experimentation for her. And please, Theo, pipe in. I feel strange speaking for your mother, but that is why I focused so much on that genre. And I'm sure I could write a book on her and all of the other genres that she impacted and participated in as well, because they're vast, and particularly her poetry and work in children's novels and books. But yeah, that's where I was coming from when it came to kind of delving into that part of literature and literature history. And regarding the period of significance, I will say that was very challenging for me. And actually, I did base the argument on the nomination for the Jim Pepper House. Also, thank you for that. That's a fantastic piece of music. It opened my mind up there, but that was we were using that argument kind of to structure this under Criterion B.
Thank you. Well, I'll turn it back over to Steve if you'd like to propose a motion.
Yeah, yes, I would. I just wanted to say one more thing, because Criterion B is a bit different than the other three in that, and that's where I think I mentioned this yesterday, having the recommendation to look at the bulletin, and the bulletin has 11 their guidelines, and the nomination is, as I counted them, hits 8 out of 11. It could go to 9 if, and this is a tactical decision. I think that's kind of beyond just the reviewer, or in my case, as far as getting it listed, because that's what you're concerned with as a writer. And sometimes we get all frightened about criterion consideration G, which is the 50-year guideline. It's not a rule, and sometimes people just, well, we want to stop short of that because we don't want to mess with it. But you can. I mean, my first nomination I did, and it got listed. So, but it was architecture, so it's not. It wasn't a B nomination. So, it's just something to consider, and maybe that's a conversation with the reviewer in DC, because they're ultimately they're the judge. We're just the advisory committee. So, anyway, I'd like to make a motion, and that is to. Given all our comments, and I'm sure they'll be considered, to be forwarded as a recommendation to Deputy SHPO Ian Johnson, that the recommendation being that this nomination should go forward to the Washington office of the National Park Service under criterion B, and as nationally significant for listing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll do a roll call. Starting with Jackie.
Yes.
And Matthew.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes.
Anne.
Yes.
Cassie.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
And myself, Heidi. Yes. Well, congratulations. Thank you both for putting in all the time and effort. We know it is a long, arduous process to do these nominations, and it was beautifully written. And we're really looking forward to hopefully receiving an approval by the National Park Service. Katie will work with you on getting the comments from all of us and incorporating those into your final draft.
Thank you so much.
Final version.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theo,
Thank
for
you.
being here and sharing your family history with us too.
A pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. All right. Thank you all for all of your time and effort for reviewing these nominations and being with us in this meeting. A little bit of sun. Reminder that our next meeting will be June 25th and 26th at the Tyron Creek State Natural Area near Portland. Another reminder, as Curry mentioned at the beginning, if you are interested in attending the Oregon Heritage Conference, please see her email that she sent out just yesterday, and that it is covered. So our volunteer time pays off. Yes, it does. And I will then, if there aren't any other questions or comments for our time today, I'll turn it over to somebody to make a motion to adjourn. Oh, Katie, go ahead first.
I forgot to put one announcement on your sign-off list. As Heidi said, I will get the comments together, create those memos, and send them out to the preparers. If you could send me any notes that you have, if you could please do that by Monday, that would be wonderful. Thank you, as always, for your engagement and your time, and great first meeting, Anne.
Yeah, great. Okay.
I move we adjourn.
All right, Sarah made a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Greg has seconded. Jackie?
Yes.
Would you vote? Yes. Where's my list? Jackie, Matt,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
and
Yes.
Cassie had to take off. She got kicked out of her space. Greg
Yes.
and Heidi. Yes. All right. We are adjourned. I have a totally random side note just by taking roll call. The majority of all of the committee members have formal names and like shortened nicknames. And except for Anne, unless your name is shortened for something, and Sarah and I, and it's always like, do I call you Stephen? Do I call you Steve, Gregory or Greg, Jacqueline or Jackie? All of you have that. Matthew, you have something
Yep,
to share?
I do. You can call me anything you want. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just something I've noticed over the course of the time, and now I just need to hear. Anne, is your name shortened for something?
No, that's it.
It's just Anne. Sarah,
Anne.
I'm just confirming you are just Sarah.
I am just Sarah.
All right. Well, thank you all. Yeah. If
Thank
I ever
you.
call you by the long version or the short version and you prefer one or the other, please let me know.
Heidi, what is your name short for?
Heidi.
Okay,
I'm not
I was like, wait
included
a
in
second.
that fun list. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny because that was deliberate by my dad. He is Chris and he was never Christopher, and so he wanted to make sure he named his kids a name that wasn't short or long for something else because he hated that growing up. So just fun fact. All right. Thank you all. We'll see you in June in person.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Steve, for
you.
everything. Great
Bye.
job keeping us on task.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing all the work. Bye.
You do all the work, Katie.
Yes, that's for sure.